PlayStation responds to developer direct.
Africa Hero Project.
Hello and welcome to Triangle Square, the PlayStation podcast. I'm your host, Brett Beck, and alongside me is the one, the only, apparently, the common rigmarole that all podcasters tell you, that there's only one Chris, despite knowing that there's a population full of them. Chris,
hey,
Figs, how you doing, bud?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing all right.
Is that the thing that separates you from the other Chris's? Is that even if there's another Chris Figueroa out there that maybe his last name maybe didn't go for Figs?
No.
What do you think?
You want to know how I know that there's definitely other Chris Figueroas with the nickname Figs? It's because my dad's nickname is Figs, my nickname is Figs, my brother's nickname is Figs, and my other brother's nickname is Figs. And that's not a joke. Just different sections of people who know us differently all call us Figs.
So like if you're at like a family gathering out and about and someone goes, "Hey, Figs," do you all just like turn your head?
No, like weirdly enough, if we're all together and someone says Figs, they're talking about me.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Because I think I started it and then it got adopted. But great story about my name.
Speaking of adoption, Chris.
Am I adopting something now?
You were adopted.
Yeah.
Your dad told me we had lunch. Yeah.
So I met another Christopher Figueroa, and he seemed kind of cool, and then he spoiled Game of Thrones for me, and I told him to kill himself, and I never spoke to him again. So
really?
Yeah. Asshole.
I don't think I've met another Brett Beck just yet, but my buddy Blaze Lewis met another dude named Blaze Lewis who's a chainsaw artist. And I was like, what a cool, like, alternate identity in Canada.
That's a great name because there's a Red Sox player named Blaze Jordan, and I know nothing about the guy, but I'm fairly sure when he comes up to the major league team, he will be a superstar. The crazy thing
about the name Blaze is just like, no matter where we go, if they ask him for a name and he says his name, everyone's like, is that like a nickname or like, do you like to get high? It's like, it's a litany of questions. It can't just be that his dad decided to name him Blaze.
Yeah.
Well, so you think that that's like, it's becoming a more common name these days, but his brother is Thorjan Wolfgang.
That's a meme. His dad was memeing.
He was memeing before memetics were determined,
exactly.
Like before that was a thing.
His wife was asleep after delivering the baby. And he was like, she's going to be mad, but this is going to be sick.
Like, oh, sir, we're here to sign the birth certificate. Go. Yeah, that'd be pretty good. I got this boring ass name, Brett. I'm kidding. I mean, look, I have a relatively common name, but I was telling my wife, my wife's name's Hannah. And I remember telling her one day, like, we were talking about something. I was like, like Hannah's like a really common white girl name. And she was like, no, it's not. I was like, it's basically up there with Brittany, Samantha, Jessica.
Yeah.
And she refused. She's like, no, it's not that common. And I was like, you know how I know it's common? In our grade alone when we were in high school, I was the only Brett. And I don't even have an uncommon name.
Yeah.
And there were at least 6 other Hannahs that I specifically knew of. We had our class is like 380 or something. So it's not that big, but it's big enough to where there may have been a few I didn't account for. But that's how you know.
Yeah.
And there was only one other Brett in general across all 4 grades the entire time I went there. So that's kind of got to count for something. You know what I mean? Whereas I knew at least 20 other Hannahs.
I wouldn't consider Brett a common name.
I wouldn't consider it a common name, but I wouldn't consider it an uncommon name. Like it's something
your
that
name's not Reginald, but nobody is named Brett. You're the only Brett I know.
You know how you also know it's like everyone's always like, oh, Brett Favre, Brett Michaels. It's like you're always something like that. So.
Yeah, and I'm Christopher. I got no leg to stand on here. Yeah,
that's my
Christopher
dad's name,
Walken,
so it's a classic name.
Christopher, whatever your dad's last name is. One of my best friends is named Chris.
we're running the risk of people thinking this is a podcast about names. And unfortunately, it's not. So instead, welcome to a PlayStation podcast where we look at gaming through the lens of being PlayStation fans. Mm-hmm. We are, of course, fans of everything. We play whatever games on whatever systems call to us. But most of the time, that seems to find its way through the cornerstone of PlayStation. So with that being said, we will, of course, say what we like about PlayStation and say what we don't like about PlayStation, but we'll also praise and or criticize the other team where we see fit, if you even want to view them as teams. So if that sounds like your kind of thing, join us. Hope you stick around and enjoy the episode. It's going to be a little different today, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of front load this. We're going to end up talking about some different PS5 news throughout the day, but we're recording split in comparison to usual. Mm-hmm. So depending on what news comes up between now and very late tomorrow after the state of play, that's what we're going to be talking about. We usually kind of give a little hint, but we're going to leave it kind of in the dark for now, and we will record tomorrow and then kind of smash them together and you'll have an episode. So for us, it's all surprise, and we'll kind of do what we can with that. But usually this episode works out a little differently. So things are going to be structured a little differently. We're going to do questions at a different time. We're going to do all the segments kind of out of order in a weird way. But we will have an episode where we cover the latest and greatest, as people like to say, in PlayStation, where we talk about the state of play, which is of particular interest to me, considering that we were just last week talking about how silent PlayStation is in comparison to Xbox right now. So the timing couldn't have been more perfect. But without further ado, we're going to get into the show for now. And the way we always start these shows off is by checking in with each other and seeing what we've been up to, what we've been playing, so that we can either put something new on your radar or just share our thoughts on new or sometimes old games, as has been the case a lot lately. Chris, defer to you. What you been playing this week?
Well, it's good you went to me first, because you have about 1,000 games to talk to, and I have about 3.
Don't I?
So I've played more Pal World. I think I'm hitting that middle point that a lot of survival games hit, where I have to get to a certain level and a certain proficiency. And maybe it's different because this is like a Pokemon-like thing, but I have to get to a certain level before I can really open up more of the crafting and more of the world. But I don't have a ton to do, so it's very slow right now. It's basically like going out into the world, killing a bunch of pals, that kind of thing. So I haven't played a ton of it. I still enjoy what I have played, but it's interesting because I want to go back to a conversation we had last week where we were talking about why some survival games hit me and some don't, especially when you introduce it or I introduce it to you, kind of thing. Because to me, it felt like you weren't as into Pal World as I was. And I wonder if it's because like half of the shit was already built. So you were kind of like, I'm going to go figure this out all by myself. But then you couldn't really because we were playing together. So you had everything I had, even though you were trying not to. And I figured it out. It's because when you play a survival game, you start with like a 4x4 shed, and then you continue building that base up, right? And you don't get that satisfaction when you join late game with someone else. And I think that's what it was. I was thinking about it. I'm like, well, it's cool to see the build, like my house get bigger and my base get better, Whereas like when I played Conan with you, you had a full mansion with waterfalls and like trebuchet systems and all this kind of shit, so it wasn't as fulfilling to come from nothing, pull myself up from the bootstraps, as they would say.
I think you're half right, and I can see that because I will tell you, of course you liked Power World more. You've played more of it. You should like it more if the game is doing its job. So there's that. And then there definitely is the fact that I generally have a pretty solid understanding of most survival games because I play a good enough chunk of them that correct me if you feel like I'm wrong, but I think there was a little bit less of a learning curve for me jumping into this game blindly than may have been for you jumping into any of the other games I've tried getting you to go into blindly. While also, I generally think Power World is a simpler game than a lot of the ones I've played. It's not nearly as complicated as The Forest or as in depth as The Forest because it's aiming to be a different type of game. It's like there is survival aspects and there's survival going on, but I don't think it's as brutal in the same capacity. which sounds like a crazy thing to say about a game where you capture people make them slaves on your, plantation, for lack of a better word.
I mean, yeah.
It's a game that's brutal in its concepts, but not really in its mechanics or depiction thereof in terms of how you interact with them specifically. Like, yeah, you're capturing the person, but the act of capturing the person is not inherently brutal. The act of cutting down the tree is not inherently brutal or even really fraught with danger in the same way as something like The Forest.
Well, you never got rated, so I would say no to that.
You are, of course, correct. But that kind of goes towards what I was about to say, which is Power World seems like the 3D embodiment of the type of survival game that the Survivalist was, where it's a little more lighthearted, and there are like hardcore aspects, and getting rated can be challenging and can offer something a little more, if you want to go back to that terminology of brutal. But inherently, the game is just kind of doing something different, which is fine. I think my favorite thing about the survival games I've liked is that they all have some kind of genre bend that I really enjoy. And Power World very well may end up being one of those in the long run. But I liked how The Forest is like a horror story mixed in with that, right? And then you have like... What I really liked about Conan is it's like a survival game, but in many ways it's just an RPG, like a fantasy RPG that you run around, and there's bosses and there's like story elements that you can find and mechanics that you can build on that only come about as a way of exploring and really figuring out some weird stuff. And Power World may have some of that, but what I really like about all those games too is like the survival is kind of at the core of it all, but if you really look at what you're primarily doing, you're not really surviving primarily most of the time. You're really interacting with the other gameplay aspects. So I'd say like Power World, you're really interacting with the creature catching mechanic a lot more often, and the battle mechanic. You're not really interacting with the survival mechanic as often. It's kind of it's in the background, it's there, and it is a constant part of the game, just like it is in all the other games that are mentioned. But at the same time, the game is really worried a little bit more about being these other things, which I think is the right call in each of these cases. Like, I don't know how to describe it much more than that, but even like the roguelite aspects of Tribes of Midgard, it's like it was a little more worried about being a roguelite. Yes, you're survival, and you're doing all that, and it does play a huge part in the game's makeup. But at the end of the day, it's really about perfecting the loop more than it is about actually just surviving. So great survival games these days usually have a genre twist on them, and that's a good thing. What I'd say about Power World, I didn't get enough time with it, which is just normal. We, of course, had problems even getting it to connect. But I think that getting it to connect is a little indicative of the problem I had with it, which is not a massive one, but it feels like an early access game.
Yeah.
And I don't mean that as a pejorative. It's just like I felt like the tutorial was really confusingly laid out and set up, and it didn't actually tell you the steps of what to do. It just kind of left a lot of fill in the gap. And if you're not really familiar with these types of games like I am, that could probably stick someone a lot further than it would have stuck me. And I still did have an issue of like, what exactly is it asking me to do next? So little things like that kind of come into play, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I'm occupied by other games. So yeah, I think that's absolutely the big difference.
Yeah. Speaking of other games that have occupied me, I've been playing on my Switch a lot recently, actually. Believe it or not, switcherooing it up.
Shake up.
To play Dave the Diver, Indie Game of the Year at the Game Awards. Or nominee, anyway.
Yeah, I heard you talking about that the other day. I've genuinely not looked into the game at all.
Yeah,
so I don't quite know what it is. Like, what's your brief sell on it? What are you liking about it?
It's addicting so far. It's So basically, you can dive twice. You play a man named Dave who happens to be a diver. So the game starts out where you end up getting this weird offer to. Don't laugh, because I laughed. I was joking with my dad about what you do in half this game. You become a manager at a restaurant, and so you
I laughed, Chris. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's fair. At night, you go to the restaurant with what you catch, and it's a sushi restaurant. So you catch the fish, and then the chef cooks it. Now, the chef is cool as shit. The chef is what I wish I was, you know? He's this black sushi chef. He's got like the circle glasses. But all of the ways, like when you upgrade and stuff, he does these like super intense, like almost anime-esque, where like he's unsheathing his knife and then he's chopping the fish. But my favorite one is he goes like he raises his hand up and like a little flame hits his finger, and that's how he lights the pans. And I'm like, this is awesome. So that's what you do. You go serve customers, you hire staff. Oh my God, I'm getting stressed out. You you serve customers, you hire staff, and then you sell the food. So it's cool. Now that I've hired a bunch of servers and cooks, Christ, they basically go to the kitchen, they get the food and serve it. And my main task as Dave is to pour green tea and beer and clean the dishes. So that's the sim part of it. But the cool part is you go in the mornings, you have 2 chances to dive. So you go down into this place called the Big Blue Hole, and it changes every time you dive. It's procedurally generated, I'm assuming. So you have a harpoon, you go in there and you just blast away at fish, and that's how you catch them. You can continue diving down. You have weight limits. Your health is oxygen, which makes me laugh because there's this one time where like I was fighting a great white shark and it killed me. And then you come back up and it's like, Dave, you should have checked your oxygen. I'm like, dog, I got eaten by a shark. That is different. Different thing. So it's really cool. The loop is really engaging. I do really enjoy the restaurant aspect of it. It's cool because you set your own menu, and then like there's this little feed. I think it's called Cookstar, and in there it's an Instagram feed. So like you can check it the next day, and people will be like, "Oh, I just got this really cool shark head sushi, and it was really good." And you use that to level up your stuff, unlock more menu items, unlock more staff.
So, give me a second. Is this kind of like the where you can look at the reviews that are essentially like people's mindset behind the parks that you create in Roller Coaster Tycoon, where it's like
it's 100% it. Yeah,
wish I could have found the bathroom easier.
Yeah,
or like, oh, they did a great job. It was very clean.
I haven't seen any like negative ones.
That would have actually been quite interesting, because anytime that you're doing something that has like that sim aspect to it, it's equally frustrating, which can make it a little less approachable for people who aren't usually fans of that genre.
Yeah.
But some of the most fun, but also most stressful parts of Roller Coaster Tycoon is trying to make as many people happy as you can and genuinely fix their problems, but also just eventually deciding that you don't care and you're just going to run your park into the ground.
Yeah. I don't know. I think the biggest criticism I have for it is I'm already early, and sometimes the diving feels like I don't need to do it. I don't know if that makes sense, but because like I've upgraded my weight limit to be really high and I can dive deeper, I have a ton of fish when I go back, and you don't use your full stock of fish. And it does not like it's not like I have to get Surf Safe certified to play this. I guess I should explain that because I don't know. Do you have Surf Safe? Do you know what that is?
I had no clue what you're talking about.
So at least in Connecticut, my Surf Safe certification means I've gone through the classes and been tested that I am fully certified for health inspections and stuff like that. So I know all the food safety.
I've never worked in a kitchen
like that.
And that's whenever I worked food service. So that might be why I don't know. There may be.
But yeah. Most places do. But, you know, Texas, Arkansas, it's a little freewheeling down there. But
that's why it's affordable down here still, you know?
Tell me about it. The point that I was trying to make with that, though, is like the fish don't expire. You know, like you don't have to watch that. So it's like there's certain fish that I have like 100 ingredients for.
Sure. So it literally does feel like, well, oh, but you have to do it to move the day along, correct?
No, you can time skip. So that's the thing. Is like I found
Oh.
myself just being like, I don't feel like diving, and then I'm just going to go back to serving the restaurant and making money. But I feel like there should have been a little bit of a more of a balance, and maybe as I continue going through, it will get to that point.
Maybe it'll dip back in that direction.
Yeah, because right now it's trivializing it, and they're telling a story. There's some cool stuff where there's mysteries under the water. I won't spoil them or anything, but
yeah,
I wish that the fish I'm catching had more. Like I do wish, like, hey, you have 2 days to sell all these fish, or they go away. That kind of thing. Because when the ingredients don't empty out, it feels very much like they're not incentivizing me to actually go dive.
Yeah, sure.
So,
well, it's interesting because I know it's kind of switched, like it's swapping the setting up to a degree, but in many ways, it just sounds like it's like water dig dug or like water SteamWorld dig, super mother load, something like that, where you're essentially going down, getting the materials, coming back up, upgrading your stuff, and going back down. But then it's got Diner Dash on top of it. It's like you took those two games and it's kind of, which is an interesting idea.
I think the better comparison would be something like Moonlighter. Did you play that game?
Okay. I played a little bit of it, not a whole lot, but yes.
Well, in Moonlighter,
you're a shops person who goes out and dungeoneers to provide stuff for your shop.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's where it feels more like to me, where it's like, hey, I got to go catch the fish so I can sell them.
Yeah, but really what I mean is like that's what you're doing there. Right? You're going down, you're getting ore, you're going back up, you're selling the ore so that you can get money to do upgrades and just kind of restart the cycle. Like, is it the exact game? No, but it's the same basic idea. You have a surface level, which has an importance to it, and then you have like hull integrity. Is your health in that? And like I'm talking about super motherload here, whereas like oxygen, I'm assuming you can upgrade your oxygen. You have more oxygen. You can upgrade your hull. You have more hull integrity, so you can take more blows. And then well, you have a bigger inventory. That way you can carry more ore before you have to come back up, and you can go deeper. And deeper is better ore. I'm assuming deeper is better fish here. And so like it's the same basic idea of go down, do all your business, come up, upgrade. But there's risk management because if you die, I'm assuming you lose everything.
You lose all but one thing.
So yeah, and I actually love those type of games. I really wish Super Motherload had a platinum on PlayStation 4, but it doesn't. That is one of my favorite games. I played Motherload. I played the Flash game Motherload that it was based off of forever ago, and adore that game. So, but alas, I like that idea on paper. It's an interesting idea shoving those two together, because usually I think what happens with both of those games is the average audience is probably going to get tired of both of those mechanics loops. But if you kind of combine them and go, okay, you're getting a break on that one so that you can come over here and essentially Diner Dash.
Yeah.
And then we'll move you back over.
I recommend giving it a shot. It's $20. That's what I got it for. Also bought Phantasy Star on the Switch.
I assume it's not on PlayStation. Is that what's going on?
No, if it was on PlayStation, I'd be playing it there for the platinum.
I figured. Yeah.
But, one day it'll come. Hopefully, maybe tomorrow. That might be my most hype announcement if they announce a Dave the Dive report at the State of Play.
You know what? We'll get there in a little bit, but we do have a question about doing predictions and seeing how close we get, considering that we're recording this beforehand and turn up we end up right. But for now, let's keep going down what we've been playing.
One more game. Shocking to no one, I am about 20 hours into Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, and it's fucking sick. So fucking good.
Early call game of the year?
I don't even want to say what I'm about to say. I'm just going to get yelled at. But there's not a single game that will come close to this. I don't give a fuck if something happens to be Rebirth this year, or Reloaded, or Judas, or fucking Concorded. None of those games will come close to Infinite Wealth.
I'm going to laugh so hard if Judas does come out this year and you're like, I was fucking wrong.
I will be. I will.
Great
lie.
Problem to have, though, also, right?
Yeah. I mean, look, like you said, Persona 3 just got 9s across the board. Like, I'm very hyped for that. Sadie got it for me for Christmas, so I'm ready to go. Like, I'm hyped for Persona.
Nice.
But dude, there's just so much in Yakuza. Like, I just hit the Sujimon section, which is Pokemon, and it's literally like, I think someone else I heard say this, but it's very true. Pal World's getting all the shit, but Yakuza,
even though Yakuza's doing the exact same thing.
No, Yakuza literally has a Pokemon game in it. This isn't like a look and feel thing. It's a Pokemon game.
Yeah.
To the point where you have to beat the discrete 4 to become the Sujimon champion.
See, one feels more like parody love letter.
It is.
Than
it's
the
very
other
much
is
that.
I'm sure what they're giving to it, but
they acknowledge
your point
it
still stands
because it's funny. There's the scene with the professor, the Sujimon professor, who he just goes, "Your goal is to be the very best and master them all. You got to catch them all." And I'm like, I get what you're doing. This is very funny, and I love it. But on top of the Pokemon game, there is also an Animal Crossing game in Persona or Yakuza 8. So it is a whole mess of shit. It's gorgeous. It's really funny. I'm just going to say it. Young, yeah, it kind of sucks, but it's also not that bad.
Well,
like
all right.
It's I'm only even talking about it because people have brought it up. Like, I guess sucks was aggressive. I apologize to Young Yat because at first it was like, that's the dude, you know? Like that's it. Like it's not even like you can't tell. Like there are.
So you're listening to the English version?
Yeah, I don't have the attention span to read it all.
Can't say I blame you. Go ahead.
So it's very noticeable at first when some of his lines are a little more dry, and you're like, "Okay, Kiryu, are you going to talk to me about EA layoffs next?" Like it very much feels that way. I think my biggest problem with the way he acts, and it's very noticeable, is I feel like to try and make the voice acting for Kiryu more contemplative, he like breathes weird after it, where he's like, "Yeah, I have to go to the doctor." And like you hear it, you feel it, and it's very, I don't know if force is the right word, but you can definitely tell he's putting something on. But overall, like it's not, I expected to be a lot more mad about it. And it's really just, it gets to a point where it's like, this is just what Kiryu sounds like. You know, that's Kiryu.
I'll give you that, but you know, it is interesting that when you change languages, typically speaking, tics like that will still stick through. So you'd think that you'd look at that and go, Kiryu's never done this when he was speaking Japanese. Like he's never done this exhale thing. So why would you introduce it? Because it's not something that you're not going to suddenly speak an entirely different way and exhale. Of course you are, but you're not going to start doing this like exhale tick at the end of your sentences when you've never done that before, even if you are speaking a different language. You know what I mean? It's an odd choice. It'd be like if suddenly you swapped to English and Kiryu only in English had like Tourette's, like his eyes would just twitch and he was like, his arms and shoulders would like nudge and be like, well, it's just English, Kiryu.
Well, you know, he could sound like a Japanese grandmother. And I guess we're okay with that not being the case. No, overall, I think it's fine. But I do highly recommend the game. It's just so good, man. It's so much fun. I'm not too far in it. I don't recommend playing it without playing 7. I think the beginning will be a little slow because it's a lot of setup. Like I'm 3 chapters in and it's opened up and I've gone to Hawaii and have a segue. And all that kind of stuff, but it's still like setting up characters, you know, that kind of thing. So I am excited to see where it goes. I think, you know, having payoff is a little bit better when you have 7. You're more willing to stick with that. And if you go into 8, you're going to be like, all right, what the fuck is going on? This is 3 chapters of introduction for the most part. So
yeah. I think that's always a weird thing about long running franchises to where like they were smart that 7 acts as a jumping on point and they can try and market it around that because there's a lot of new characters, a lot of shakeup happening, change the gameplay, a lot of ways in which this being a new jumping on point is easy to do, or at least there's a lot of new ideas can be brought in alongside all the rest of the changes. But even when you go from 7 to 8, it's like, how well can you as a writer or how well can you as a designer try and design this to where you don't fully need 7 to give the story the payoff that it gives on its own, but at the same time you can try and set these things up through clever dialogue use and stuff where you can essentially recap things without feeling like you're setting up. And having not played this game, I don't know how well it does that, but I've played other games where it's clear that it's trying to cater to a new audience while also trying to be like, but we are a sequel to this thing. So it's like, well, if I've already played that thing, why do I need this? And that's kind of where gamers are stubborn. But I really like games that give you like, hey, we're going to design a completely optional tutorial section that is going to recap some of the story throughout it. But if you don't need it because you already played the last game, you have a more mechanically driven idea of what we're doing here, and you already know what's happening in the story, you can skip it all and kind of immediately be into the thick of it.
Yeah.
It's a really hard balance to strike, but I think there is one.
I don't want it to sound like criticism necessarily.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's bad. You know, like I don't think the way they're going about it is bad. I just worry that someone without the history, like I've played the vast majority of Yakuza games and I've played 7. So it's one of those things of like, okay, I can deal with this stuff because I have a history with the franchise. You know, I wonder if you hopped into Yakuza, or I guess I shouldn't call it Yakuza. If you hopped into Like a Dragon 8 or Infinite Wealth, it's a very confusing title. I wonder if you would be okay with the first couple hours. It kind of reminds me of like Days Gone, but less boring.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of games struggle with that, and I'm always very mindful of when people say like I just couldn't get into it because I couldn't get past the opening. I'm like, your opinion's not invalid. I also think there are problems with the opening of some of my favorite games.
Yeah.
It's just it depends on where you are. Yeah, Days Gone has a genuinely rough 8 to 10 hours at the beginning, which is a long time.
It is a long time
to be rough.
And it's funny because Days Gone is one of the quintessential examples because Sean, I've been trying to get him to play Days Gone for years. And he started it and he was like, this beginning sucks. And I was like, that's totally fair. I recommend you try it, at least get to a horde, but whatever. And then he beat it the other day and he was like, that game was fucking awesome. I was like, yeah, it sucks at the beginning, but it's awesome.
Yeah, but man, it always sucks when a game that you love is slow at the beginning. Yeah. It's like, no, please hold on.
Yeah.
Like, genuinely, I was so close to just dropping Red Dead 2 because I already didn't really love Red Dead 1. And so coming into the second game was already kind of like I don't have any kind of connection to the series that's already positive to drive me through things that aren't looking great. And so for the beginning of the game being like painfully slow, it's just kind of like, is it going to grip me? Can it even grip me? Am I coming at this too negative without even knowing it because of my time with the first game? And then finally it caught on, but I was so close to dropping off the game before it caught me that it's a calculated risk. And I think it's one of those things where I can't imagine that doesn't get spoken of in playtesting and they just have to go this being drab and slow is necessary for the payoff at the end. I don't know that I could say that of a game like Days Gone, where I absolutely adore it. I don't think the first 8 hours really do anything to make the preceding 15 to 20 hours better, to be honest. Maybe about an hour and a half of those 10 hours, of that 8 to 10 hours, is important for the later part, but you could just cut the rest and just give me the hour and a half and then do the rest, and I'd probably be like, fuck yeah.
Yeah. But how would you hear Deacon complain about Copeland? First of all,
man,
you're being very hard on Red Dead 2. I happen to like
a game that I love. but I'm just telling you that was my experience with it. That, of course, that doesn't mean everyone had that experience. I genuinely imagine, and I mean no harm to anyone who says this, I don't mean this in a bad way, someone loves the opening of Days Gone and it's like thinking that we're being sacrilegious for saying that it's rough at the beginning, but it is.
Fuck yeah, I love getting bandages for 8 hours. No, I mean, listen, your opinion on Red Dead is fine. It's wrong, but fine. I'm joking.
That's okay. Yours was wrong for a long time.
Yeah, and I fixed it. What do you have to say about that?
I can at least take the hit now because I know that you're coming from a place of knowledge that's similar to mine. You know what I mean?
I've accepted Arthur Morgan into my life as my Lord and Savior of my PlayStation.
Yeah, fair enough.
Either way, I think Yakuza is really fun. I'm really enjoying it. Let's see. I don't think I've been playing anything else, but I did download the Metro Redux collection yesterday.
There you go.
So I think I might give those a shot. I don't own Do you own Exodus? Because I don't anymore. And,
yes, I do.
Oh, fuck yeah. All right, I'll play them.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I got it digitally.
I hope so.
I feel really confident that I did. If I didn't, then I don't own it anymore. Or I don't think I did.
If rumors are true, I'm very positive it'll be on sale tomorrow at 6:00 p.m.
Yeah, that's probably fair. All right, let me quickly run through what I've done. I've been kind of doing a blast from the past kind of thing. So I finished up Prince of Persia, got the platinum in that, and was the first to platinum it in our Discord platinum competition that we have going on, trophy competition, which was great. I went back and I talked about Dark Mirror, and so I did Logan's Shadow. I think I talked about that last week, but what I've added since last week, I did Loco Roco Midnight Carnival. Me and my daughter have been playing Loco Roco on her little pink PSP for months now, slowly but surely moving through it. And so she wanted to play it again. We pulled the PlayStation out, and I downloaded the original one on my Vita as well. And we were kind of side by side playing. And then I thought, Midnight Carnival is on PlayStation, and I never played that one. So I downloaded it and really enjoyed it. It's like not a super complicated trophy list, but it's like you have to beat the game. But the game does get progressively harder. But I had a really good time. And, just generally Loco Roco's idea of like, hey, we're going to mix this very odd form of platforming with interesting boss fights to this odd mechanic. Had a good time with it. And I've been having a blast playing some of these old games that are just designed in such a fun way. But it's cool playing them on this emulator because they're so clean. Like, I would almost be okay of almost every game that I'm about to shout out. I'd almost be okay if modern games came out looking just like this, 4K, 60 frames per second, because they're fun and they look good enough. So moving along, I have talked, and Saul has as well. And Chris, I think that maybe you've started it, or at least you know about it. Killzone Liberation is the only Killzone game that I did not replay back when I did my replay run a few months back, or about a year and a half ago, actually. I adore that game. It does so much right and takes so many interesting risks within Killzone's world because it came at just the right time in them kind of developing that series. Beat it. Got the platinum. I love it. It's one of those ones where not only do you have to beat the game, you have to go through and do a bunch of specific kills and stuff. It's way more involved. And it was a really fun platinum to get. It's going to spur on a conversation here in a minute, but I want to run through the rest of these. Pinball Heroes. I remember everybody going through it. I was waiting for another game to download, so I thought Pinball Heroes is like 75 megabytes. I'm just going to download it and play it. And suddenly I'd been playing for an hour and a half, and I popped the platinum without even anticipating. So that was a good time. I absolutely smashed it in the bowling level, the high velocity bowling. I got almost 1 million points.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know it at first because I kept the first ball in play for so long. And I love pinball games. My wife's like, "Why'd you download this?" I said 2 things. I've heard people say that it's a relatively fun game, a relatively easy platinum. I hadn't looked into that at the point. And I was like, I love pinball. One of the go-to games I always shout out is 3D Space Pinball from Windows XP. It's a fucking dude, it's an amazing game, and I played countless hours of it. So playing this one, certain tables I liked a lot more than other ones, and the high velocity bowling one was really nice because it had like this bowling mini game in it, where like you had to unlock the lane and then shoot through, and you get a spare or a strike, and it would change. And so I kept getting multiple strikes and spares, and then I finally lost the ball. One of them I lost. It did the ball save to where it goes back up without counting against you. So I kept going. And then whenever I lost the first ball, I got like 800,000 points at once.
Oh, shit.
Because of all the combos that I'd kept going. And it doesn't do that until you get ball land. So that was pretty interesting. So I had a great time with that. And I also just generally liked going through all the different PlayStation IP and playing boards that were based around it. It made me want to play Hot Shots Golf. Because it's been so long since I've played them and they're on there. I'm like, that would be a fun platinum to do as well. Games to revisit. Yesterday, I also did Jumping Flash, which is a game that, if I'm not mistaken, it may have been Overlord or one of our people in the Discord that shouted it out as a game. And I've heard it talked about, and it's like one of those cult classic PlayStation history games. So I thought I need to play it. It is a very weird 3D game. It's first person. It's got weirdly, I wouldn't say limited movement, but it's got like early 3D weirdness. And at first I was like, this is kind of rough. I don't know that first level. And by the time I got through with the first level and really came to grips with the mechanics, I just blasted through the game. You've got to beat it, and then you got to do some. It's one of those classic examples. If I would have followed a trophy guide, I'd have probably done it in a single playthrough, but I was just playing the game, having a good time. It is a weird idea. I can both see why it was not that successful and why it was also loved. Say that
Fair
about
enough. I've never played it.
I think it's worth downloading and playing if you've never played it. Okay, like, it's cool having that little nugget of PlayStation history, and I think it's an all right game. But Chris, this last one is one that I know you know about.
Oh,
I know you know plenty about.
Okay.
And it is the end of my current run of absolutely fantastic PSP games that I'm having a blast replaying again. And it is the just sublime, so fun, over the top, stupid Pursuit Force. It's
that's so good.
I love that game already, but it's been so long since I've played it. And since I downloaded it yesterday, I have just been on it. It's so fun. Jumping from car to car. It's kind of got that Wanted thing where the shooting mechanics are not that great. They're all serviceable and it works exactly as it should. But whenever a target pops up and you jump from car to car and you unlock the ability to be able to slow-mo shoot them while you're jumping in the air, it's fucking cool. It's just a fun game. It's zany, over-the-top characters and gangs that they come up with are all ridiculous. The fact that it does a little speed movie reference where there's a level where you've got to let the bus not go under 100 miles an hour.
Yeah.
It's a constant game of like, we're just going to do a lot of crazy stuff with driving, land, air, and sea, and then a few on-foot sections with these zany, ridiculous characters. So right before I came to do the podcast, Chris, I've already took out the general and Capelli, and I think one other one. But I just did the convicts final boss guy, and it was hard.
It's hard. That's the hardest one.
Dude, I had to redo that level like 10 times to get it. I couldn't. And then I finally figured out what I was kind of doing wrong. The whole game, I have been primarily relying on capturing vehicles and just shooting them down. But I forget that a very viable option is getting the brute force and actually crashing your car into the other cars slowly. And that's dangerous on that level because often you'll catch your car on fire. But if you do it just right, you'll build up enough of your justice bar that is you can heal yourself immediately and just keep going. And that was the only way I was able to get it. And I got it with about 5 seconds left before he hit the border.
Nice.
But I was like, I did it. I fucking did it.
Yeah.
So now I'm on the Vixens, and then I'll have to do the ones that that I've already unlocked, but I haven't started yet. The G92 or whatever they are, the weird final one. I am having a blast of this series. It's so fun. And I am probably going to go ahead and jump into Extreme Justice because it's just they're so fun.
I like the first one way better than the second one. I don't love Extreme Justice.
I've never played the second one. I've only played the first, but I knew the second one was there.
Extreme Justice' biggest problem is that they added mechanics that make the game more tedious.
Ah, that sucks.
Like, you
Because the
can
first
heal
game kind of
now.
has a perfect balance.
It does. The problem is, like, now you can heal, right? And I
Okay.
think you could have done that in the first, but it's not as prevalent.
Well, you can heal in the first by just not getting hit for a certain amount of time. So if you're driving and not getting shot at, you'll just slowly regenerate.
So in this, you have to build up a bar, and you can use that bar for special attacks or healing.
Well, that's the same in the first one. You can use your justice bar, and I usually use it to heal instead of special attacks.
Well, then I don't know what the fuck it is, because in this one, it feels a lot more punishing than it did in the old one, where, like, I always feel like I don't have enough health to bring it back. But I'll still play. I'm still going to get the platinum. I'm like 72% done with it, so I'll probably finish it soon. It's a fantastic game. Those are fantastic. Arguably the best classics out. I will say that.
Dude, pretty much everyone I've played. I want to take a step back and really talk about Killzone Liberation for a second.
Go for it.
There is nothing, maybe slight repetition issues. I would even argue that I don't feel that, but I could see someone fairly arguing their way to it. But for how long Killzone Liberation is, this was new. I never played the DLC when it came out originally. There's an entire fifth act to this game that I just got to play for the first time. There's no trophies tied to it, weirdly enough, but it's there. And it's you going to free Rico from the end of the game after he gets captured, which originally was like a cliffhanger, and then Killzone 2 came out. And since I never played this fifth act, I just thought Killzone 2 comes out and Rico's out, and that I assume that happened off screen in like a story. But no, there's an entire chapter that I'd never played, so that was interesting.
You know what's crazy? If that DLC had never come out, maybe the tide of Helgen changes.
But you know how I was talking about Prince of Persia kind of really nicely falling into the Metroidvania genre, despite the fact that it's never been one. Yes. Liberation does the same thing, and it's weird how it does it, because it's not like a twin stick shooter. It's also not a real-time strategy game. It's really almost more like the top-down third-person sections of Metal Gear Solid 1, really iterated upon a bunch. But the game is incredibly fun. It's got great mechanics, and I think it's one of those genre bends where it's almost like Batman, where I think Batman slotted so easily with Arkham Origins Blackgate into the Metroidvania genre that it didn't feel weird. Because, you know, TT Dog was talking about how Onion Boy, or whatever the thing was called.
Turnip
Boy was a completely different game, right? We talked about how he was saying it's changed genres almost entirely. I think some franchises can change genres, but you always kind of want to be adjacent to the genre you were already fulfilling. So like Killzone moving from a first-person shooter to a top-down third-person shooter is not really a massive change. And we saw that happen with Resistance being a first-person shooter, and then Resistance Retribution being a third-person shooter in the vein of Siphon Filter, since Siphon Filter people made it. But what I really like about that is on the PSP, PlayStation was just kind of like, yeah, we of course want this to feel like you're playing console level games on the go, but we also realize that trying to get a first person shooter running well on PSP is going to be complicated. So adjust where you need to, but kind of be similar. And I think we've talked about it so much, but a game like Liberation and even games like Logan Shadow, I think prove that there is a very viable still sense of being able to make games on a budget. We talked about this a little bit last week, but every time I play with some of these great PSP games, I'm just constantly reminded, like, what happened to the Sony that was willing to try these things? Pursuit Force is a stupidly fun game. It's not complicated. You can probably make it in a year. That game was made in a year, and then Extreme Justice was made in a year, and then Siphon Filter was made in a year, and its sequel was made in a year. It's like, what's wrong with that? And we got a question from one of our patrons, Mr. No Fate. He says, is it possible that the games industry has grown too big too soon? Are games so expensive to make because we've become accustomed to AAA to maybe even quadruple A games? Do consumers in the industry need to take a step back, focusing more on smaller AA and AAA games with franchise intentions? And I think that what he means by with franchise intentions is kind of what I just talked about, like looking at ways you can scale back and maybe genre shift a little bit, but one that feels right to the intentions of your franchise. So Chris, I mean, like kind of, we talked a little bit about this here and there, but we've often kind of sold this dream of wishing that Sony would kind of create these PS Plus games to act as filler between their big ones, which is ostensibly what they're doing with this premium collection right now. It's like, hey, here's PS Plus. You're going to be able to play this game that maybe you've never played, and it's going to kind of act as something we can offer you in between our big AAA releases. So, what do you think of this?
This is going to sound a little gatekeepy-ish, but I think yes, I think the industry grew a little too much, but I also think there's been I don't know how to say this nicely, because I don't mean it in the way I'm going to say it, but I think there's been an influx of more normie people, right, who want to see graphics and intense graphics. And there is a level of games cost $70. I can't pay for a game that costs 10 hours long, right? Or I don't think you could make a game like Pursuit Force today, outside of the nightmarish political state that would cause. Just the fact that it's a level-based, not very deep game, people would not. I don't think it would sell well. I think that's the problem. Is there's a lot of people looking for Flash, and there's people like us who will play whatever the hell we want. But I don't think a lot of people who partake in games do that. Gaming is huge now. It's millions upon millions upon millions of people play. So I think we're losing smaller games to sell to those people.
Sure.
I do think if you look at some of the information that came out of the Insomniac leak that we didn't discuss in detail, but if you look at that and you look at the way that they're talking about games, I think we might be at the point in the horseshoe where we're going to start going back to shorter games in smaller titles. And
yeah,
because I think think about,
we've arguably been seeing that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's kind of what I was going to say is we're seeing it with stuff like Prince of Persia. We're seeing it with EA Originals. We're seeing it with Tokyo RPG Factory.
Even Assassin's Creed Mirage.
I don't know if I would say Assassin's Creed Mirage is necessarily what I'm thinking about, but yes, it's a smaller,
but what
scaled back version.
It's literally taking what Assassin's Creed has become and being like, okay, we're going to make it a little shorter. I mean, it really is a lot shorter. Actually, it's like a 30 to 40 hour game. And it's like we're going to look to the past for inspiration more than the future, or more than what we've been doing, up recently, which has been interesting. Because, I mean, like Prince of Persia, I'm sure they were like, we're a little hesitant to give you AAA budget for a Prince of Persia game. What can you come up with that might be budget friendly? And they go, well, let's look to the past when this game was side scroller. What can we do there? Is there an part that's, is there a really big niche in the market right now that we can slide into with a popular genre that works within this? And I think Metroidvania is such a blissfully obvious solution to that problem in a modern, setup. So to that end, I mean, I could see that.
I think there's a possibility, and this may be a hot take, but I think there's a possibility where the layoffs and studios shrinking leads to a renaissance of smaller stuff and may actually help the industry in a good amount of ways. Because if you look at even just Microsoft, right? Of course, all those people aren't devs, but all that has to happen is 50 of those devs come together, start a studio, make a small game, and off to the races. I think we talked about it during the ABK thing. It's like people will not want to be might not want to be a part of Microsoft, and this isn't a Microsoft diss, it's just potentially true. So they go, okay, well, we were bought by Microsoft. I don't want to work in a Call of Duty factory for the rest of my life, so I'm going to move on and we're going to make a studio. Or, hey, we cut our teeth on single player Batman games, and now we're being forced to make a Suicide Squad live service multiplayer game. So we're going to leave the studio we founded and found our own studio. to do the games we actually want to make. I think we could see a lot of that stuff. So I wouldn't be surprised if we are going to hit a point in like 2027 where we're seeing smaller stuff comes out. I mean, look at I can't remember the game, but that guy at the Game Awards whose whole thing was about his father, and he's making a small. No, I guess I shouldn't disparage it, but he's making a smaller game.
The one that was like the side-scrolling Metroidvania,
Right.
African, his African lore.
Exactly.
It looked awesome.
It looked sick, and he left a bigger studio to do that. So I just think we're looking at a point where the industry grew very big, and it's starting. The big studios are starting to shrink themselves down and right-size themselves, as Colin Moriarty would say. But there is also going to be a vacuum of people who, if you're creative and you want to make games, you're going to stick through it. If you're in games to make money and this layoff sucked for you, you're going to go work at a tech company and probably make more money and be happier. But I do think we're going to see a lot of creative people break off from the big publisher conglomerates and make their own stuff.
So, let me say this, because I have a couple of, just kind of cross-section points that I'm curious to kind of go a little bit further down. But I think the first one that's most obvious towards your most recent, remark is seeing studios shrink down, seeing people leave and make games on their own, seeing studios that are backed by big companies also start making smaller games that maybe come out quicker and solve a lot of the problems we talk about where games are too expensive and they take too long to make. But so I think one of the obvious concerns that may pop up right there is as much as we're all lamenting the fact that games take 5 years, 4 years to come out these days, if not longer, depending on if they're new IP, there is arguably a wealth of games already coming out in the market.
Yeah.
And the market's fairly well saturated right now. And it's almost like the gap that was left from those big games has started to be filled by EA original style studios and independent studios slowly pushing themselves up, and then Focus Home Interactive kind of coming in and having their new AA ostensibly be what AAA used to be in many ways. So kind of what I'm getting at there is, what do you think, and do you even think that there might be a worry of, if we start to scale those games back and make them cheaper and release a little sooner, more often, what is the point to where a sudden flood of games might become too many games and it may choke out smaller independent studios? And I guess is the solution that we're talking about is the baby that we're throwing out in that bathwater worth throwing out potentially if it does come to that? You know what I'm saying? Like, the repercussions could be interesting. I don't know how I feel about that.
Again, I'm choosing my words delicately, but
me too. But this was just a general thing. That
I know. Do you really think that hiding in the bottom of the PlayStation store is a Game of the Year contender?
No, I certainly don't.
Do you even think there's like a 7 that no one has seen because it's being buried by jumping tacos? I don't believe that.
I don't know if I believe that it's happening often enough. So I can definitely see you there. But I think at the same time, there are studios that start from pretty quaint, starting points and kind of work their way up, that potentially get choked out before they ever actually get the chance to do that. And I don't mean in the sense that their first game comes out and would be a 7.5. I even mean game studios that come out and their first game's a 5, but it's almost on the cusp of something that is that 7. And then that 7 comes out and it's almost on the cusp of something that is a 9. And they slowly work themselves up. And then suddenly you have a From Software, a studio that for a long time had kind of started getting less and less popular and making games that did worse and worse until suddenly their luck turned around. Now, that's a big backed studio, but that's just a small example of something that even had corporate backing kind of having to sputter out in a way before it was able to bloom into something in a much less contentious business section than what we see now. And what would that happen? What could be the impact of that on smaller studios? it may generally be that for the health of the industry as a whole, something has to give, and you do have to. In a weird way, this almost sounds like, Elon Musk is going back and forth with other people about population. Like, is too many people on this earth actually a problem, or can more people being in there solve problems quicker, therefore creating, dealing with some of the things we're doing? So you look at that in the game section, it's like, is having more games constantly releasing at any given time and more studios constantly putting out games going to get us to better games and more iteration quicker and better? Or are we reaching a point where cannibalization has to start because the market can only support so much? And it's a weird analogy, but I kind of see it. And I feel the same way about population. I don't generally know the answer. There's an intuition of me that thinks there being too much on the market is a problem, because inevitably something will fall. But maybe there's not too much on the market even now. I don't know.
Whatever.
Is that too crazy of an analogy, Chris?
No, I just decided to say what I was going to say. I think that the cream rises to the top, and
oh yeah. Sorry. And I'm the cream.
Yeah, right. And I think the sad reality is that if you're not making something good enough to stand out, it's not going to stand out. Like, it's that simple. It's like, I don't want to shit talk other people, but like when I listen to Sacred Symbols, Colin will sometimes talk about how his game didn't sell well because it was buried by jumping tacos. Okay. Now, I like Abraxia. I like Abraxia too. I think Super Perils of Baking is a bad game. That's why it didn't fucking sell. It's not a great game. There's also the factor of, jumping tacos are all over the place and all of this stuff. But I think I've talked about this with Blake before. It's like Colin always talks about, you need to cut down the PlayStation store so the cream can rise to the top. And I would love to cut down the PlayStation store. And the question that he's never answered is, why should his games be there? Right? If you cut off all the jumping tacos, okay, then his games have just gone down a level, right? And I don't mean an insult. I love the man. I pay him every month. I'm not trying to insult him. But his game, you cut jumping tacos down, his game goes down a level. Okay, now you're like, Life of Black Tiger, games of that quality, we're cutting it down. His games come down another level, right? You cut down the level after that, and then at some point you're like, yeah, Super Perils of Baking doesn't deserve to be on this fucking store.
Yeah, I think that's going back to where I have a huge issue with this is just generally speaking that if you're going to create a line, and I've long said that I do find there to be problems with the fact that it's so easy to put trash games out.
Yeah.
Yeah, like in an ideal world that wouldn't happen. But as we always say, we don't live in an ideal world. So spending too much time worrying about that or postulating towards that doesn't really matter. What we need to talk about is what will work, or at least what the reality is. And I think the unfortunate and slightly uncomfortable reality of putting a line anywhere in the sand is who determines where that stopped? Who determines that we have hit the point where this is what we deem as an acceptable game? And what if plenty of people don't agree with that guy? And it's like, it's always like generally keeping a free market ultimately does mean that you're going to service a more interesting and diverse group of people. And you're going to have, even you're servicing so many people and there's such a varying quality, but at least no one's being left out. And I don't even really know that that's fair. Sony shouldn't be worried about leaving anyone out. But ideally, if we're just looking at this from that standpoint, it's like, what does it really hurt letting people, if they want to play jumping tacos, let them spend their time and money on jumping tacos. But I get your point. It's like, at what point does a game's quality, as subjective as that is, become something that you can objectify, which is essentially what you're doing in that situation, and saying, no, this isn't good enough. I mean, I guess you're qualifying it more than objectifying it,
right.
But still.
You can't have an open storefront without garbage. You just can't. But, and that's why I use him as an example when I'm talking about it, right? It's because he is trying to create the Ouroboros that could eat his own work. right? That's why I would never sit here, as someone who wants to write and hopes to one day put out books and make movies and all of this kind of stuff that I'm probably too old to be dreaming about. I would never sit here and go, oh, that the 50 Shades of Grey shouldn't be on the shelf. Who the fuck am I to say that? And then that's just me screwing myself down the line, right? Because then the next author goes, I don't like his book, get it off the shelf because it's taking, real estate away from me. I just think that you have to, what I would want is Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo to bring back the seal of approval. That's what smart, I would want.
Actually.
And be like, we love this game. It's in this section of the store. This is where all of this stuff is. And then there's like a fucking back alley store where you can get your jumping tacos from a fucking drug dealer, But that's what I would want to see is every month PlayStation, even if they don't highlight them, but be like, during submissions, we've given you the seal of approval. You get higher point in the store or something along that line that you don't have to pay for. We want to curate our store while also leaving it open. So there is another PlayStation store that, bang, you can go in there. You can find your Super Perils of Baking, or you can find your Jumping Taco, or you can find your Moon Scars. I like Moon Scars, but
Moon Scars looks sick. I haven't played it, but
it looks sick. It's fine. The animation's fantastic. But I would never advocate for less. I just think that at a certain point, your game has to be better. Again, as much as people want to say Jumping Taco is blocking the store, I will pay someone in this audience $100 if you can find a 10 out of 10 game that is being buried by Jumping Taco. $100 bounty right now. Find me a game of the year that nobody knows about because it's buried by Jumping Taco. It doesn't exist. That's the reality, right?
Sure. I don't think you got to move to extremes necessarily. Even if you just want to go, how often does it reach a value point? And I think, we often talk about the scale being kind of curved in a weird way, but I'd go as far as to say, there's very likely there is a chance that there's a 5 out of 10 that's being buried. And then you have to go, how much do I care about the fact that a game of that quality is getting buried? So you move it up a little bit and go, well, what about a 7 out of 10, which is pretty average for the modern game, right? Like the modern game is usually around a 7. And then you go, so it's the same value. And look, I'm not saying you're wrong. I get it. I'm just saying let me make
a quick counterpoint.
You don't even got to go to extremes.
But here's the thing: you do have to go to extremes because you want to know what a 7 out of 10 is. It's the crop. Okay, what I'm talking about is there is no cream of the crop that is stuck behind these things. A 7 out of 10 is an average. Well, I guess more a 5 out of 10 is an average game. Realistically.
Exactly. So 7 out of 10 is an above average, but it's become the standard to such a degree that people view it as a relatively average score.
Yeah, exactly. So sure, but again, I just think the industry needs to start rising beyond that, and I do think good games will rise to the top,
Sure. Well, 2 other things I want to mention real quick. I think one of them will be quite quick, and I'll do it last. I kind of hinted at it a second ago. He talked about in his tweet, he actually uses the language, our game's too expensive because we've become accustomed to quadruple A games. And while that could be a typo, and he put one more A than he intended, I don't think he did. And I think really what he's subtly nudging at, and I agree to an extent, is that AAA has drifted so far, and it always has, right? It's always been a moving target. But specifically last generation and moving into this one, AAA has become so expensive to such a degree that it almost does feel like the big games from any given publisher does need to be moved into a separating, differentiating quantifier, because realistically speaking, there are AA games being made now for the same budget, if not even sometimes more than what AAA was 10 years ago. And so you get to this thing where it's like, at what point does this continue to grow to a point of hard to sustain? And generally speaking, kind of to your point, right, it's like, even if that's what's happening, if we're going to go for a free market, it goes the same way. We have to give the market freedom to kind of implode on itself if that's what it takes. And it's funny because you brought up the Nintendo seal of approval. And I started thinking, the whole reason they did the seal of approval was because of the video game collapse of prior to Nintendo, where it was like, we need to show people that we actually look at the games and qualify them as being worthy of our system. And I find that to be such an interesting idea, because back then you didn't have the internet in the same way, and you didn't have to deal with people not agreeing with what you gave seals to or what you chose not to give a seal to. I wonder how that would go in a modern environment. If you're really going to try and pull that out, or even if that need comes back because of a gaming collapse. Because if a gaming collapse does happen, the only way that any place has any kind of ability to do anything about it is to say, like, trust us, because now we're going to start acting as the arbiters. We're going to be the curators to say, this is good enough. Now we want you to come to our platform because we want you to trust that we have your best interest in mind and that we don't want that to happen again. And I don't want to, over sensationalize. I don't know that a collapse is coming. I don't really even know that there's any signs of that.
Definitely not.
It doesn't seem to be. But it would be an interesting thing. But lastly, just kind of going back to Pursuit Force, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned that Pursuit Force would be too political in today's age, because one thing that really stuck out to me as kind of odd was that Spider-Man 2 went out of its way to just not have cops, despite the fact that they were in Spider-Man 1.
It was super
I
dumb.
remember playing the game and being like, they just act like the cops don't exist now.
Yeah.
And that's like, cops are like so ingrained in what people think of New York City that it's almost more weird to not include them than it is.
Yeah, but then you have dumbasses writing headlines like Spider Cop. But you guys are fucking stupid. You guys are so dumb. Yeah, I remember there was that game at the TGAs that started with you as a cop. And I was like, wow, real bold move. In this industry, in this climate, good Lord.
But I guess that's kind of the fun of playing something like Pursuit Force, is it's so over the top in ways that people would consider offensive now. Like I was laughing so hard because I just thought it was such a wild thing. My wife looked up to and she saw it when it's doing the opening cutscene for the Vixens. Where it does for all the gangs. There's like one where this girl's like flipping through like laser lines, like laser trip lines. And at one point she's like crawling and the camera like zooms so close to her that you can see a panty shot. And I'm just like, what the fuck is going on here? And even simple things, right? Like,
God bless Big.
The Vixens are like overtly sexual in every mention. They're like, I'd like to get on top and all these different things. And you're just like, this is... I don't miss it as something that I'm like, oh, I miss when they show things the way they were. I think that type of humorously sensationalized story writing and world building in a world where the whole basis is that crime has gotten so bad and gangs have been able to overtake things so bad that the government had no way other than creating a specialized police force to jump on other vehicles in the middle of normal traffic and shoot them down. It's like the setup is so ridiculous that if the gangs and characters weren't so ridiculous, half of the fun would be gone. Half of the fun is dealing with these dumb general people from the commanders or the warlords saying dumb stuff like, I can't even think of all of them. There's been so many, but it's just like, I'm going to roast your chicken, boy, or some dumb stuff like that. It's just like, okay, that's fun. It's just, that's where we are. And, even like, I love how overtly heavy the game is on you to do good, because it's like, you can't fail at all, because if you fail, it's like, you're fired. And it's funny. I don't know how to describe it, but the game cares so little about what's going on in the political sphere, in comparison to today's time, that you're just kind of like, it's fun to see something that seems to be so no holds barred, even though it probably was. It's just playing it in a modern context changes the way you view what you're looking at to some degree. So But thank you, No Fate. That was an interesting question. I would love to hear other people's thoughts on that. And Chris, I really like. I'd be curious to see what people think about the idea of a seal of approval, like or a seal of quality, something to that degree, to help act as a curation while keeping it straight. So that'll probably be something along the lines of the community's take. If it doesn't end up being specifically around the state of play, but I think it was an interesting conversation to go down there. So thanks for the question. And Chris, let's keep kind of going down this train. So you may remember last week we did a Velvet's Corner that was driven by AI would you rather generated questions as we were kind of playing around with the idea of AI, which became a little bit of a focal point of our conversation last week. So one of the things that we did for our community's take, which you can be part of, it's where we reach out to our community during the episode and ask a question that we collect answers on and then read them on the next episode. It gives you a chance to get your voice heard within the community, gives us a chance to either be pushed back on something we may have said or get an interesting viewpoint from some of our listeners. And Chris decided last week that the community's take question should be one of the questions that we did not answer that the AI gave us. So, Chris, the question, as it were, was, would you rather live in a world, or rather, would you rather be the main character in a game, but have to collect every collectible in the area before you can accomplish your goals, or live in a world where everything is 8-bit with limited physics? And I was surprised at how people seem to really struggle with this one.
It's a struggle.
Well, I was surprised at how many of them kind of actually struck me as like what would I rather do? Because sometimes would you rathers feel intuitively obvious to you. And then sometimes it's like, I don't know. Because they're usually so ridiculous. And this one is quite ridiculous. It's like, what do you want? Do you want a world that is ostensibly beautiful and photorealistic? Or do you want one that is so 8-bit and just down and out? So we've got some fun answers, and what we tend to do is shout out and give priority to our patrons who go over to patreon.com/Nartech and give as little as $1 per month to keep the show going. And we want to start off by going to Rude Days 93, longtime listener, longtime patron. He says, this is a tough question because for me, it depends on what I'm collecting. If we're looking at basic collectibles like in a Ubisoft game, give me 8-bit all day. But if we're talking the backpacks like in Spider-Man, I found those much more interesting to grab. So I guess we're reaching that point of, if you had some kind of knowledge, it kind of helps steer you in a direction. But it sounds like, relatively speaking, 8-bit's probably the way to go because the other one is completely contingent on the game's design. So, Chris, I noticed you and I didn't give an answer to this one like we said.
We did
so
not.
I thought it'd be fun for us to answer these as we go along. So as a quick buffer, what do you think? I know that you tend to do pretty well with collectible games because you find joy in putting on a podcast or a movie or a TV show or music and just kind of letting the game almost be like a background task.
Yeah, pretty much.
But in this scenario, you would be the character. You couldn't distract yourself in the same way. You're going to be like Baby Driver where you like put a headphone in and just...
Yeah. I think, honestly, I would go 8-bit because I think limited physics would be fun as hell.
I thought about that. Like, what all could you do? I started watching Code Monkeys again, and that show is wild.
Yeah.
It's everything that G4 was. It's overtly 2000s. It's constantly being sexist and as a joke, and it's real wild. I'm enjoying the show for what it is, but it's very wild. But they do all these weird things that like it seems so easy to do in 8-bit. It's like he just slices open a dead donkey in his office and lays in it like a tauntaun, which would be very difficult to do in real life. Like if I came across a dead horse, I would have a hell of a time trying to cut that dead horse in half because of physics.
Yeah, it's true. I was thinking more along the lines of like, would I need a car anymore? Because I could just jump to work,
Not bad.
That's the big question.
It
really does depend on the collectible, but I think it depends on the area, right? Like if I couldn't leave my house every day until I collected 50 pieces of dirty laundry, I would that would be awful. I think I'd rather turn the game off, if you know what I'm saying. But if it was like, okay, if you want to move out of Connecticut, you have to collect 100 chestnuts. Be like, fuck. All right.
So it's like, how granular is the goal?
Yeah, because the question doesn't specify. It says when you leave an area. So like, if throughout my shift at work I'm not doing my collectibles, means I can't leave, and like one of them's on the roof and I don't even know how to get there, like that's a huge problem for me. Right? But if it's like, okay,
very much,
you can leave Connecticut if you collect all these things, then we're a little bit more acceptable, I think.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I'll give my answer in a second, but first we're going to go to another one of our patrons, Rude Cold, who said, I find collecting collectibles to be quite tedious, but an 8-bit world would drive me crazy. If the collectibles could be part of a puzzle or like geocaching, it could be fun rather than just hunting every dead end like in most games.
Is geocaching just collectible hunting?
Yeah, 100%. It's just, hey, here's a list of, essentially, here's a clue, which is like a ding, and then it's up to you to figure out where the geocache is in this area.
So, like, we just got a letter. We just got a letter. We just got a letter. But wonder who it's from. The game creators.
So, Chris, this is a lot more like clicking in R3 to ping for the blast shards around you in Infamous 2. Where you click it and it's like there's one up there, and so you run over there and you click it again, and it doesn't tell you on the map where it's at, but you can use your vision to figure out where you think it might be.
There's one in the ocean, and the ocean on the mini map is the same color as the blast shard, so you can't find it.
Oh no, that's just a bunch of blast shards. It's just a sea of blast shards.
That's why he can't swim, because he jumps in the water and just too much power.
Gets overwhelmed.
Explodes.
Yeah,
nice.
Exactly,
I love
Chris.
That.
Picking up on it. I want to give one more before I go to mine. Jehudi MD says, I'll take the lesser of two evils and say a game where I need to collect things to achieve my goal. However, I assume that world is 3D and beautifully rendered, which to that I say the question would lead me to that same assumption. So, yeah. I mean, if you want a beautiful world, it's weird, right? Because I think sometimes 8-bit games can be really pretty. Like you can look at it and be like, oh, that's interesting. But it does feel a lot more limiting to where eventually you'll have seen all the combinations that you could see. Whereas there's a lot of things like, I keep coming back to Spider-Man, but I thought what was interesting about Spider-Man 1 is like Spider-Man 1 looked incredible. And then you think, well, it's New York. They can't really make it look that much better. And then Miles Morales comes out and it does look better. And you're like, oh, okay. This ray tracing is pretty sweet. This is kind of cool. Probably can't make it look better than this. And then Spider-Man 2 comes out and you're like, God damn, New York is kind of sexy, bro. It's like there's lights everywhere. The sun and the way that they impact, how many light sources are coming in. It's all over the place. There's way more detail. And I guess what I'm saying is like, the more power you have, the more of that you can kind of cram in there and be like, oh, wow, this is really pretty. And even seeing the same thing time and again can find a way to be made just as awe-inspiringly beautiful each time you see it, despite being ostensibly the same thing. I don't know how long you could really pull that off through an 8-bit world. So, yeah. I think I'm with you. I get really, like, normally the thing that will determine whether or not I feel like platinuming a game is how many of the collectibles I naturally got just from playing and looking around. And then how annoying the rest of them will be to get, depending on how far along I got. So having to stop doing anything that I'm doing and have to finish this, it's like my big complaint that I talked about for Tales of Xillia 2, where it's like, great, things are moving along. Now completely stop and earn a shitload of money and pay us your loan payment before we let you do anything else. Like you said, I'd rather turn the game off.
Yeah.
But then the question becomes, does someone pull the cartridge, blow, and then stick me back in? I don't know if I want that life.
I mean, I think most men would like that life.
That's reincarnation.
Yeah, take it out, blow it, and then put it back in. It's not a bad thing.
I'm gonna give one more from another one of our patrons. Stingray X says 8-bit for sure. Living in worlds like Excitebike, Contra, Metroid, etc. would be much more fun. It's a good way to look at it. You just get to live in all the worlds that you want. Man, could you imagine ending up in Castlevania and just being like, fuck. Every time I want to eat something, I've got to break open 8 chandeliers and hope a chicken falls out. You know? So, there you have it. All right, Chris. I don't think, with this weird half episode, there's not an obvious transition point. I would say from here, let's go ahead and move into the few questions we have. And I think we're going to end on our quick predictions. One of the questions we have here comes from one of our newer listeners, who is RMG0731. He says, what is the ultimate end to the atrocity that is the Embracer Group? They announced 100 more layoffs this time at Eidos Montreal and canceled a Deus Ex project. By far, this studio and IP should be one of its premier teams, but has been said has been said many times, they bought too much and in such a short time. Now it's just sitting on a hoard of IP. This is a particular problem to be in. What happens when someone buys up a ton of IP and then starts to kind of fall apart at the wayside? So if you say the ultimate end of the atrocity, I mean, if you're going towards swinging to the negative, Chris, do you have a view there? And can I challenge you to offer a slightly more optimistic view of what could happen?
I think the Embracer Group is a cancer that needs to be rooted out from the stem in the games industry.
Look at you go, Chris.
I think the government should genuinely, the government should step in and break that company up. It's actively destroying the industry. Fuck them.
That's interesting. I just think it's an interesting connection to say that you want the PlayStation Store to be open, but then you want the government to step into the other part of the market and go, no.
I think when a company is buying things up willy-nilly, laying off more people the second they buy them up, clearly has no business strategy, is borderline money laundering. That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah, I think the government should probably look into why they're actively putting thousands upon thousands of people into unemployment because someone didn't know what the fuck they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem. Like, obviously going to the government is extreme, but the Embracer Group is an active cancer on the video game industry. And I'm glad the Saudis didn't invest, because they'll probably die so much faster. And then they can have another THQ sell-off, and maybe some of those franchises will go to people who actually give a shit about video games. With my full chest, fuck everyone at the Embracer Group.
All right. So now the challenge flip. Can you see or I guess in a weird way, that is your ultimate end and positive swing, right? Yeah. Because then the games go somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah.
That's fairly well in line with what I think too. I think Embracer Group, as much as I love a lot of the IP they've brought up and that they've extended more life into a few IP that we would have never seen without their involvement, kind of like bringing Saints Row back around, which questionable.
Ruining it.
Bringing Darksiders, doing 2 more Darksiders games that were both very good. I think doing a remaster to Kingdoms of Amalur. There's a lot of good that they've done, but I think when you look at all that they've not done, as well as all the things that they've started and then not been able to go through on because of, like Chris said, a seeming lack of a clear business plan, outside of just buying and hoping that it works out. Kind of outside looking in, it's probably not as simple as that, but outside looking in, it looks a hell of a lot like we're just going to buy a bunch of things and hope that the way they were already going to do things is going to work out in our favor and we'll make money. But that doesn't seem to be what's happening. That was going to be my flip side of it too, is that I think the ultimate of this is hopefully this IP, regardless of what happens, this IP is going to go somewhere, most likely. I think the mix of this is who buys it, right? Does someone buy some of this IP just to sit on it more? Does it get sold in big bundles where you get a lot of IP you may not want to try and get the one that you do want? The weird thing about IP in general is that IP does have inherent value, but we see amongst game studios and game developers and game publishers themselves, there's a ton of IP that's ostensibly already in a graveyard. not being touched, not being used, not really doing anything. And we all seem to be okay with that. Every now and then we'll wistfully wish that something would come back around, but a lot of IP is just gone and it was of its time and we'll never see it again. And sometimes you got to look and go, I wonder how many of the IP that they've bought that they're sitting on that some people were like, well, this means we'll never get this. Well, were we ever really going to get that anyway? And that's the curiosity. It's like, we often talked about how interesting it would be if Sony bought a lot of Konami IP that's been ostensibly dead for a long time and just started letting other people work on it. But I don't really know how real those chances are. Some IP may just be dead because the market can't handle it. Or rather, the market can't service that IP. So I do think it's interesting, but hopefully the IP that matters to people and that still has some life that's obviously left to be pulled out ends up with people who are wanting to do something with it and will employ people to do something with it. And maybe that will kind of work on some of this to counteract some of this layoff stuff that's happening. I also just think that the game industry, going back to No Fate's question, it did grow very quickly, and it grew very quickly strictly because of COVID and the need to try and speed game development up. So I think a lot of people got first-time jobs in games that wouldn't have normally made the cut, and now they're going, and it looks terrible on paper, and it's very sad for them. But it's kind of that thing of like, if the market hadn't gotten that weird shakeup that happened because COVID destroyed the way that that all these markets operated, these are people that may not have ever interacted with this market otherwise. It's a weird thought. Mm-hmm. So we'll see what happens. That's an interesting one to say. But I know a lot of people were excited for Deus Ex to kind of come back around, and there you have it. Definitely doesn't seem like it's going to. We got a bunch of layoffs happening from other areas, so it sucks. But there's that. A more lighthearted question for you, Chris.
Oh, good.
Jehudi MD says, when there's an automated self-checkout lane at the store, do you use it? Or do you opt for the human interaction? And he put HU-MAN, so human.
Yeah, I'm using self-checkout every time.
Is there a reason why? Is it just because you don't want to bother someone else or what?
I don't want the human interaction. Like, I don't. Here's the thing. For me, like, if I'm going to the grocery store, I guess it would depend on the situation. If I'm going grocery shopping, someone else can do that shit. If I, I sometimes go to Stop and Shop and I'll get, like, a bag of chips and a sandwich and, like, a drink. And, like, I don't know. I don't really need someone else knowing that I did that. I don't know. I'm good. I just do that on my own. But I don't really ever want to talk to someone. So that's really what it is. Like, I'm good. I don't need to have a conversation. I don't like idle conversation, right? Like, if I would rather go up to the cashier, she says hello, I say hello, and then she never speaks to me again, than talk about the fucking weather. But yeah, it's fucking cold. We live in Connecticut, bro. It's December. It's January. Whatever the fuck month it is. I don't need you to tell me I'm wearing 2 jackets. Like, what are you talking about? Like, and that's the thing. I did that job. I get it. Like, but I didn't fucking talk to customers. Nobody wants to talk to me. And if they want to talk to me, they'll start talking because they do that. I'm not going to start talking to you. Like, I'm the type of person where I will get in line and make a show of putting on my headphones. Like, I'm good. Like, I don't. That's a anxiety thing for me. It's not something I'm interested in dealing with. I don't want to have a conversation unless I know you. I just don't. Unless we have something in common. Like, I'm not sitting here saying, like, oh, if you listen to the show and you see me in public, stay the fuck away from me. I'm just saying, like, if I don't know you and I'm there and I'm somewhere for a specific reason and we have nothing in common other than the fact that you are being paid to scan my groceries, I'm good. I know that I sound like an asshole and I'm coloring it up a little bit, but the reality is, like, I just don't want to have conversations.
I feel you. I'm at a bit of a stage of feeling like I'm wanting to start going to, and I've done it a few times recently, that I'm wanting to start going to the people who are there to check me out. But I've also it's kind of tied in with something else. So I have traditionally used them because of their convenience. I can get in, I can get out. It does make buying certain things just kind of less invasive for people. Like if you are a woman and you need to buy, some of your monthly healthcare products or whatever, you don't have to feel like someone's in your business. If my wife asks me to go get her some, I can go check out without having to have some guy be like, who you getting these for? Some dumb comment.
Right.
Like there are times where it does feel like this is nice that I don't have to explain to anyone why I'm making a purchase. And so that element of kind of preserving your privacy is nice for when you have it, like when you need it, when you want it. The classic weird thing of where like, you try, like you're just going to the store for condoms, but you're trying to find other items to put on there to distract from the condoms, and then you just make it more weird. Because it's like, bro, why are you buying Kleenex, shampoo, dozen bananas, a box of condoms, and some motor oil? Mm-hmm. It's like, listen, don't worry.
Yeah, look, once I went to Walmart and I didn't use self-checkout. Me and Sadie were buying some board games. And the woman spent the entire time talking to us about how good it was that we were buying board games because the end was coming and we were going to run out of electricity soon. So it was really good that we got board games. And I think that might actually be the goddamn problem is I don't want to be put in that situation where I can't make fun of the person because they're directly in front of me, but I also can't take them seriously and feed into their delusion. So I have absolutely no good way to go about having a conversation with that person.
Yeah.
How do you talk to someone who thinks the fucking world is ending? Now here was the interesting twist. This was middle of COVID. So I guess middle is extensive, but it was still when like a little bit of COVID panic was going on, right?
Sure.
And it's like, so you're not talking about COVID. You're talking about something else. And that's scarier. Like what?
Is it also the chance that if they are right, you'd rather just live in blissful ignorance?
No, because look, for me, if the world's going to end from anything other than a solar flare, we'll know in advance. I don't know what's about to happen that's shutting off my electricity. Okay? If China's coming, North Korea's coming, I don't know, Mexico's coming, I'll know that. Like I'll hear about it. You might not. You live a lot closer to Mexico than I do. But I will find out before I need to save my exploding kittens game because they're coming. Okay. So that was the whole thing. Me and Sadie talked about in the car. It's like, what could this woman possibly be talking about? Because she was very clearly not talking about COVID. Maybe she was talking about the vax. If the 5G chip Bill Gates put in me allows me to turn off lights, but what could she have been talking about? And that's the scary part.
You are not wrong. You're not wrong.
And there is that point. What if she is right? Is fucking Cthulhu on the way? And he's like, oh, you have board games. You survive. The fuck?
Maybe he's like super, like he's about to destroy you and he spots Risk in your board game cabinet and he's like, I love Risk.
He comes out and he's like, I've been josing for Settlers of Catan.
I woke up from my 3,000-year slumber.
If you win, the world is saved. That sounds like a great anime. Where the whole show is the main character trying to extend a board game as long as he can because if he loses, the world ends. I would watch that show.
Yeah, I mean, it's not too far from the Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey, where it's like they come face to face with death, and of course they have to win, and so they win the first game against death. So death goes best 2 out of 3, and then they win that one, and he just keeps going, and eventually, like, are you just going to have us play here forever? So it's a good setup, but it's the basic same idea. That'd be pretty good. Well, going back to the automated thing. I'm in a weird position because oftentimes my wife will complain at the price of things. either locally at a store or even online from a store that you buy that is selling it to you from America. And, I tell her all the time, I'm like, well, you spend so much money on Temu and Shein and all these things that are fast fashion and cheap goods that are coming from China being made for way cheaper than anyone can do them here, and they're shipping directly to you. I was like, it's really hard for an American company to compete because we have standards of living that China just doesn't. I was like, that's a different thing. It's just kind of coming from that. So I tell her, I'm like, if you want something that kind of comes to mind to me all the time is like Radio Shack doesn't exist anymore. And every now and then there's a time where I'm like, fuck, I need something that the only way I have to get now is through ordering online. And if we would have all not been so goddamn quick to start buying stuff online from Amazon for convenience and 2-day shipping and blah, 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 maybe I'd still be able to go to Radio Shack and get the goddamn capacitor that I need that I can't get anywhere else. And so I think of things like that, as crazy as that is. And I start going, maybe I should buy my jeans for $30 as much as I wish I didn't have to from someplace. And $30 is already too damn expensive for jeans, in my opinion. But, $30 jeans so that they don't continue to go up and so they're still available here. And then I think, okay, well, maybe I want to keep employing the person behind the checkout counter, because if they're not being employed and more and more people start moving to completely doing, cashierless checkout, at what point do places start going, well, maybe we can just go entirely online and just only have people here that you come and pick up? And it's like, maybe I want to be able to go into the store and choose something without having to scroll online and find it and add it to my cart. It's like all these little steps that I don't necessarily want to see go away, or I don't want the options to go away. And so I weigh that against how much I want the convenience. It depends on what it is. If it's one thing and it's going to be way quicker for me to run through a 10 item or less self-checkout, I'm going to do it. But, you pick and choose your battles. So that's an interesting one. I'd actually like to hear yours, Jehudi. Do you find yourself wanting the human interaction? I think a big part of this, too, is what do you do for a living? Are you peopled out by the time that you go to the stores? Oh, you're muted, Chris. But I know that you're peopled out because you work in an environment full of people.
Yes, I am.
There's somebody who just does a lonely-ass job putting toothpaste caps on toothpaste. That doesn't see anyone throughout the day. They're just sitting on a stool, 30 feet from the person who puts the tubes in the stand, and they just don't talk to anyone. And when they get off, they're like, I'm going to go to the store and talk to the cashier.
Hey, man.
It undoubtedly exists.
Oh, of course it does. I'm not that person.
We got... me either. We've got one more here, or actually we got two more questions. One of them will be pretty quick, and it comes from our longtime listener, Sweet Gran Turismo Jones. He says, I'm pulling my hair out with my Monster Hunter Iceborne Platinum. What's your most favorite game that had a hard platinum that you reluctantly had to get because you like the game so much?
Oof. The Witcher 3 is probably my only answer to this. I don't tend to struggle to get a platinum. I'll probably drop the game first, honestly. Yeah,
I think that's the hard thing, right? Is that really is the essence of the question is, what's a game that was so good to you and you love so much that in spite of a hard trophy list, you were still just like, I'm going to get this sumbitch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I still have like designs to go for Red Dead, but that just seems like a lot for me. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm. It's a hard one. I think Monster Hunter is a good answer for him, going through something like that. And I can see for you The Witcher being a great answer because it is an involved trophy list and you have to do quite a bit to get there. I'd say games that have growingly hard trophy lists, depending on when you play them. So the long run answer I've kind of given to a similar question before is Terraria, because it is an incredibly difficult platinum to get. It requires a lot of play, and every time they update the game and add more, it just makes it even harder, because getting all the pets, if they add 4 pets, guess what? There's 4 more that you have to find. Damn it. It just keeps going from there. But I think a recent example that really got me in is a trophy list that I usually would not interact with is Mortal Shell. Something about that game just kept pulling me towards it. And despite sounding like on paper, and to this day, I'm sure I can tell you, if you understand anything about the game and the fact that you're just a little being that inhabits the shell of a dead person to take on a class and go through, So when you're not in a shell, a single hit kills you. And there is a trophy for beating the entire game without using a shell. And that was a hell of a time. And I complained to Chris quite a bit through some of my playthrough there, but I got it. And I'm so damn proud of that trophy. You know, it's just one of those things. So I think that's probably my more modern example.
Sekiro. No, that's dumb. There was a really
Sekiro's
easy
a good
answer.
Yeah.
Dude, I played... Oh, my God. I played so much of just one level to get the... Because you had to grind out skill points at the end.
Yes, you did.
And I think I've told this story, but I had to go kill one guy, run back down, rest, go back, kill the same guy, run down, rest, do that. And I think I did that to the point where I had like 250,000 souls from that one dude, and I wasn't even close. And I got to a point where I ended up beating the game, like 8 more times, and then that's when I got enough stuff.
Yeah. Dude, that was an insane run. I can't believe you pulled it off. But you were dedicated. You just were. Yeah,
I was.
Those moments hit you when you're just almost indescribably inspired. Like, I am going to fucking get this. I think at some point it becomes that the lost time fallacy or something where it's just like, I've already sunk too much time into it to quit now, and so I'm gonna become stubborn.
I think
I'm getting this damn thing.
But like, it's also like with this specific trophy, this would have been such a stupid fucking trophy to miss this platinum on. Max out your skill tree. I killed every optional boss. I beat the game, all the hard shit, collected everything, but I couldn't max out the skill tree. Really? No, I'm maxing out that skill tree. We're good, baby.
I feel. Yeah, that's a good question. If Monster Hunter Iceborne ends up being yours, Ryan, then I hope that you can wear that badge with honor. Last one, and this is going to be where Chris comes in. I don't want to go too heavy into it. We know a good chunk of what's coming anyway, and there's a rumor talking about the rest. But Chris, let's make one state of play prediction that we're going to see if we get right after we watch it. Okay. So are you going to dive deep back into your well of Dave the Diver being a shadow drop?
No, I'll put that out there, but I wouldn't predict that, I don't think. Can we do a bold and like I think this is going to happen?
That's fine.
Or do you want to go
I don't care either way. We can do a bold and right. It's more likely to happen because I have a pretty interesting bold one, and I'm almost curious if you're on the same page.
I think I am.
Okay.
Do you want me to go first? Or do you want to go first?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So my regular prediction is Ghost of Tsushima 2, 2024.
Okay.
My bold prediction is Sea of Thieves is shadow dropped during the show.
We're in a mostly same ballpark.
Yeah.
My hot one is that Hi-Fi Rush shadow drops during the show, just like it shadow dropped originally.
The battle of the shadow drops. Let's go.
That's why I thought it was funny earlier when you said Dave the Diver shadow drop, because I was like, my crazy prediction for this is a Hi-Fi Rush shadow drop.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's an interesting one. That would be just kind of cool to see a lot of rumors kind of come. I would even go further than to say that's a rumor. I mean, that pretty much seems like an unconfirmed report at this point, So, and I think Hi-Fi Rush is a little more believable than Sea of Thieves currently. I still believe that Sea of Thieves could absolutely make its way there. It's been on Xbox long enough that they've probably hit as much as they're going to get there. Expanding that audience out to new markets is probably the smart thing to do here. Definitely if you have Rare working on something else new that you might be able to make Rare fans of through Sea of Thieves. Yeah. Yeah, that fucking game. That was during Xbox's ways of showing things wrong, in my opinion. So I'm glad they've made a lot of strides in that particular direction towards showing things in a better manner. My more reasonable one, I'm kind of landing. I actually think a lot of what they're kind of talking about in the rumors checks out. One that I think is more likely is we're going to really see, there's a lot of games here, right? There's 15 games. So really, my thought process here is that there's going to be a large variety.
15
and
plus
I think
games.
and I think there's a really high chance that we see some of the things they've been kind of skirting around. They may save it for another state of play. There's usually a few per year. So I think that, it makes sense to possibly see Silent Hill or Metal Gear Solid or something like that, one of those titles somewhere along the line. I'm a little more dubious as to whether I believe we're going to see a first-party studio's work here. I'd be so excited to. But what I really think is we're going to get a major PSVR 2 game for Sony to kind of be able to be like, we're trying to show you why you bought this thing and why you should be excited, and kind of quell a little bit of the noise going around the internet that maybe it's not going to get supported as well as the PSVR 1 did. Definitely, since some people read into some stuff about the PlayStation Portal in Spain starting to gain on the sales of PSVR 2 in Spain. And that is interesting. Certainly something that's interesting to look at. And you can wonder why, and price, maybe availability, who knows exactly what it is. Maybe there's not a big VR market in general in Spain. Maybe there is, and Sony's just not in anywhere in that VR market. We don't know the answer entirely. I'm sure it could be figured out. But I do think that there is a need for Sony right now to really kind of come out with a big Half-Life Alyx style level of announcement for PSVR 2 to be like, this is your big game. The Metro VR, I do think, if that is a true rumor, feels that super well. Metro is known for being first person, works well in VR. They're known for being very detail oriented, works in VR. And I think you can ape on a lot of the marketing that made Half-Life Alyx so compelling by being able to just kind of do that in a different world.
Fair enough. You don't think
so? We will
game
see.
Is Half-Life Alyx?
Here's the thing. I've given up hope on that to a degree, but I'd still like to see that game make its way over. And it's interesting you bring that up because people keep talking about Sony and its support of PSVR 2. And could it be better? Of course it could. It could always be better. But there's really something to be said that Steam barely supported their own device. Mm-hmm. There's a little less need for them to because they're on a very open, wide open platform where people can just release whatever they want. So there's way more VR titles on PC than there are on any of the other platforms. But it's still pretty wild for them to be like, yeah, we pretty much just put out Half-Life Alyx and everyone else is going to do the work to support it otherwise. So you got to give Sony a little bit of credit.
Hell yeah, brother.
Yeah. So we'll see if we're right. We'll be back, Chris, you and I, tomorrow to watch the damn thing and figure out what's coming. Maybe we'll get a little bit of a first-party decadence, and maybe it'll be more than just seeing all these live service games that we've kind of been floating around the edge of. So I am not going to be surprised at all if we see if Fair Games are conquered, but
we will. We'll probably see. Both.
We'll see, and then maybe that'll do something to your fantasy draft. There, you find like you had your first game for yours drop, and it was a doozy.
It was a doozy.
It was a doozy. Sorry, Chris. I'll see you tomorrow. We'll see how right we were.
Hell yeah, brother.
All right, we're back after the state of play is hit. So we're going to dive into the news, and surprisingly, there's a lot going on this week, even separate of the state of play. So buckle in, and we'll get around to the state of play at the end of the news section. But we're going to start the news section off with something that the state of play brushed against a little bit, and that is February's PS Plus Essential monthly titles. They have been revealed. Foam up the competition day and date with Foamstars, skate it up in style with Rollerdrome, or face automatons and Soul like Still Rising. The titles will be available February 6th. This seems like a solid month, and I'm really curious to see what the incentive was from both parties to move Foamstars to being a day-and-date release. Clearly, we've seen this be a smash success for other titles, namely Rocket League. So I'm curious. I don't think that this was concerned that the game wasn't going to do well. I think this is more of like, we'll do well initially because of the big burst, and then hopefully word of mouth will continue to soar the game further and further.
I wonder if it's not even a question of if the game was going to do well, but they saw the reaction of people going like, this looks cringe. And we're like, we're going to give you a reason to try it. And then we can also sell you a bunch of microtransactions because you're getting it for free.
Yeah, sure. And of course, they're only doing the single month, right? So anyone who doesn't have PS Plus or doesn't pay attention or whatever it be, it's not an evergreen title necessarily. It's, it's a little splash in the pond. And if you jump in and get it, cool. If you don't, we'll still make some. I think it's a $30 game, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Either way, it's a good idea. It already requires Plus, so there's no reason that people wouldn't already kind of look for this and go towards this. And like you said, this seems clearly designed to be some kind of vehicle for microtransactions. And so the easiest way to kind of pull that off is to give some form of a barrier of entry that's easier to get through, even if it's just a single month of, if you download the game, you can have it free forever.
Yeah,
exactly. It's worked really well in the past. Arguably, that might be the difference between what made super-powered rocket cars on PS3 and Rocket League essentially the same game. One wasn't really that successful and one was,
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Rollerdrome looks great, so that's cool. And we already have Steel Rising, and I still really want to play it. It looks awesome. But this is a good month. Let's keep moving along.
We also have
otherwise,
Rollerdrome, by the way.
Oh, Chris, look, you're treating me so well over here. You're like consistently opening the door for me when I don't even know it. So there's probably a good few thank yous I need to shout out, but
it must be nice.
You'll have to take the one lump sum.
You open my account and you're like, Jesus Christ.
Every now and then, I almost went to your account at lunch today.
Yeah.
Whenever I got the platinum for Pursuit Force, because I was like, what do I want to play next? And I decided to just look through PS Plus while I was I wanted to play a racing game, but I didn't know what. So I just kind of ran through. But yeah, I almost every time, it's about a couple months apart, and I'll log on to yours and be like, good Lord, he's bought like 40 games that he's never bothered to tell me about. So I'm drowning in titles that aren't even PS Plus related.
Mm-hmm. I should be charging you a subscription fee.
You should. Chris Fix Plus.
Yeah, exactly.
And an otherwise tame PS5 software update, bringing quality of life features to the party system and extra functionality for Pulse Elite headsets. Reports flood in from users of the Cronus Zen cheat devices no longer functioning correctly as of this update. Whether an intentional move on Sony's part or not is currently unknown, but games with known cheaters, such as Rust, may have just become accessible again with at least a minimal level of concern when you're playing on PlayStation. So this is one of those odd things. I can, of course, see Sony doing this on purpose. It seems interesting that this would be a side thing. But, Chris, I don't play as many online games as you. Do you feel like cheaters are pretty running rampant in a lot of the online titles on PlayStation?
Definitely Cronus has been an issue in a lot of the titles I've played, but it's not the Wild West like the PS3 is. Like Modern Warfare 2 on PS3 is a nightmare.
I was genuinely surprised when we did Grand Theft Auto 4's multiplayer that I didn't notice any of the cheats I noticed back in like 2011 when I last played this with friends at my house, when we all lived together and we were just goofing around. There were people spawning like dinosaur vehicles and all sorts of crazy shit that I have never seen before or after. But I thought, dude, the cheats in this game are insane. And we looked online on Reddit and people were like, yeah, the multiplayers for these games are just full of people injecting code in to spawn whatever they want.
Hell yeah, brother.
It was like a giant it was like a giant Tyrannosaurus, or not, a Triceratops skeleton on top of like a car frame that you could get. It was weird. Someone out there knows what I'm talking about.
Open up the rib cage. And
I remember that I had a coworker who did this for Red Dead Online, the original Red Dead Redemption 1's multiplayer, because he was telling me that he had he showed me pictures of it too. He had to like modify his Xbox, because what you had to do was like take the disc out while it was spinning and put another disc in that would inject code in for Red Dead. I don't, not my foray, so I do not know, but he cut a hole in his Xbox in order to be able to extract a disc while it was spinning. It was really weird.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So do what you will with that information. Next thing we have coming up, Gran Turismo 7's latest update 1.42 adds new cars and cafe menus. So if you stepped away, now might be the time to jump back in. There's always something going on and being added to that game. That was a quick one. The next one's a little more involved. While not quite the same initiative we've seen in China and recently India, PlayStation recently made a strategic investment in African gaming startup Carry First. While details are scarce currently, looking at their past endeavors, you can expect Sony to expand their presence in the rapidly growing gaming market of the region. as they really continue to push a more global presence for PlayStation, which has been smart because we've often seen that some of PlayStation's strongest regions are ones that other people just don't even have really much of a foothold in at all because nobody really pushes to prioritize. So we've definitely seen gaming as a whole, even on the platform level, become more global. But I think Sony was a little ahead of the curve on that, and they've continued to be with the China Hero Project, India Hero Project. And while this isn't quite a hero project, it wouldn't surprise me if we're not far from that, or if it's not the same idea operating, ultimately under a slightly different name. This is a growing seed since this is just an early thing. But, Chris, you talked about the Game Awards guy who made the game that kind of had that African lore to it. And while I know that's not necessarily a game from Africa, I think it does kind of make you go, okay, well, what kind of games would we see from people who are necessarily native to that region? Mm-hmm. And how does that impact China Hero Project has brought some really interesting titles, and I'm assuming India Hero Project is going to do the same thing. And of course, there's not just a huge delta between what games are, but even a game like Chia that was made very much with this idea of we're going to make a game that's inspired and built around the ideals of my home, region. That game was unique and interesting, even though I didn't follow through and beat it. I kind of fell off of it for many of the same reasons I fell off Breath of the Wild. But point being, it was an interesting game, and I don't belittle it for the sake that it didn't catch with me. A lot of people seemingly loved it. So,
yeah, man, I'm excited to see what comes out of all this.
My only thing, what's left? Russia Hero Project?
I don't know. I guess you gotta. I don't know. It could be a China. Russia. I mean, Russia makes their own games.
Well, China's already, China was the original hero project. So I guess it's kind of what I mean is what's the next big area?
Because I think a lot of it is like access to consoles and obviously less fortunate areas. But I know the prices for consoles and stuff in Brazil is huge. So maybe that's a barrier for them. And it would be a way for Sony to go in and be like, hey, we'll help you guys out. And you're making a game here. That's cool.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be interesting. I actually did think about kind of more South American territories, and Brazil is always the one that comes to mind because the stories of astronomical prices.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah.
Cool.
We'll see what comes of that. But this next piece of news before we get into the roundup for State of Play is a really interesting one that I honestly did not expect. It's an interesting timing, but with the final Rock Band 4 DLC hitting, many have expressed disappointment in how difficult coming across the peripherals has become, with production halting years ago. While not all of the instruments, PDP, it changed to PSP, I don't know why. PDP has announced the Riffmaster, compatible with Rock Band 4 and Fortnite Festival, a wireless guitar sporting 36 hours of battery life per charge, a 3.5 audio jack so that you can stream your audio across, a foldable design for ease of storage, and more. A price has yet to be announced, but it is expected to release this spring. This is awesome because one of the biggest problems about trying to play any of the old Rock Band games is just how fucking hard it is to find peripherals. Yeah. And even though they made tons and tons and tons of guitars, it's still incredibly hard to find guitars. And definitely hard to find guitars for PlayStation because you can use the PS3 guitars, but if you don't have the dongle that goes with it, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So thankfully the PS4 ones and this one being PS5 will be or PS5 as well. It will be directly compatible, directly wireless. So this is a cool thing to see. And an interesting time. A lot of people have been saying that with Microsoft buying out Activision, that the time to see a new Guitar Hero or a new Rock Band or whatever, even if it's just that style of game is nigh. I don't know how I feel about that, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I think that that's like a flash in the pan that I don't think you'll ever go back to in the same way. I would love to be proven wrong, but I think you're going to see more Metal Hellsingers and Hi-Fi Rushes and games that use rhythm gameplay to their advantage and make their own songs without having to rely on licensing very expensive tracks from artists.
Yeah. I would think it would be more niche, which is part of the problem, right? Can you really have a niche game that requires Taylor Swift to be in it, you know? Not really.
Yeah, I think that's the hard part, which is it's interesting because I've been continually surprised by what they pull out and from what size of bands they pull out for some of this Rock Band 4 DLC that's continued to hit. There's Limp Bizkit DLC, there's Linkin Park DLC, there's Blink-182 DLC that's been hitting, there's some Taylor Swift on there that's newer, and you're just kind of like, okay, there's even bands that are more up and coming that are ending up in Rock Band 4's DLC. And while this is the last one, so those days will be ending, it's kind of been amazing to see how something that still requires a license is still pulling such big names.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Also, this is probably the only way that anyone's still paying $2 a song.
Yeah, right.
So that might be why. It's the way that we can get back with all the lost revenue from streaming, you know? It's like buy it for $2 a pop on
right, exactly.
on Rock Band 4. So
makes sense, honestly. Put out your Taylor Swift record on Rock Band and get your 15 sales, but hey, you're not getting any sales otherwise, really. Except for me, who buys all her vinyls, so
that's true. But also, apparently all the Rock Band 4 DLC does really well. Like,
really?
To the point where there's no reason for them to make another Rock Band or to try and get into the very expensive business of making peripherals for it again. But there's enough demand there that constantly putting out DLC has been received really well, and they make a lot of money. So this is cool to see someone kind of step in and fill this void, but you still get to this point of like, what happens when the drum sets all kind of break and go down and you don't have anything? And there's ways around it. You can use an electric drum kit with Rock Band, and there's actually there's a drum pro mode on a lot of these games and stuff too. But it's like, do you really think people want to spend $500 on an electric drum kit just to play? No, it's not the ideal way. Also, it's way more real drums than rock bands are, and I think it's going to scare people away. So this is interesting to see. What a wild world it would be in if the reason this is the final DLC is because Rock Band 5 is right around the corner.
Maybe. I don't know if Phil can work that fast.
All things are possible through Phil Spencer.
Not untrue if I've heard anything about the Xbox ecosystem.
Yeah, who knows? We will see. But Chris, the cream of the proverbial crop that we've been discussing may have just come to the top during this this early state of play for the year, and a lot of stuff was packed in here. And you know, a couple weeks ago, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, we kind of talked about the developer direct and how we talked about Sony being a little silent. And I think the showcase here had a lot of great stuff. It had a few things that I thought were interesting, but you know, not necessarily breakaway successes for me. But I think the interesting takeaway I had from it is that we still haven't really moved any closer to knowing what the hell any Sony first-party studio is doing. We just have a much bigger idea on what all their third-party partnerships and second-party partnerships are putting out for them, which is by no means a bad thing. There was a lot of bangers here, but let's break into it and kind of start talking about what we liked, what we saw. I don't know if we're going to get to all 15 games because I don't really know that that's just the way that we're going to do this, but across the board, I think this may be one of the best state of plays of recent memory. It had great pacing, a lot of variety, a lot of great games, a lot of big titles, and just enough little nuggets of things that will pull people to go, wow, what a memory to have, you know?
Yeah. So, well, that brings me to a question before we really break into it. Because this was such a bang, and there were two first-party games here.
Okay.
Well, 3 actually. But
okay.
The question to ask you, is it copium to think that this state of play was clearing the deck?
Oh. That's interesting. Run me through your thought process here.
Well, they focused a lot on their partners and games that are at the very least PlayStation Studios games. And you wonder if they're like, okay, but at the next showcase, we're going to be showing you Naughty Dog, Sucker Punch, Insomniac, Spider-Man DLC. I can't even remember the other fucking teams at Blue Point and Firewalk, right? And and Haven, right?
London,
because we're going to focus on what our teams are doing at a showcase. So we showed you Judas in February. You're not going to see it in March. You know what I mean? But you're going to see Ghost of Tsushima 2.
You know, I think that's interesting because I think two things became very obvious to me here. I think the State of Play naming, like the branding of State of Play, has been far more successful. Mm-hmm. And it does seem like they're leaning on this for bigger style announcements than they used to. State of Plays felt like it was regulated to something a little more smaller, a little more niche, and that was more update given. This had bigger things. And of course, some of it was very update driven, and some of it was things on games we already knew about to some degree. But this felt large. This felt almost like what we've come to see from the PlayStation showcases that they were doing. And I'm almost curious if PlayStation Showcase is not a very good name recognition thing, and they've had better luck standing on the branding of State of Play, which I do think is a fantastic name, actually. So when you look at that, and then you think about the news that they follow it up, that there's going to be another one in 2 weeks, if even that. Actually, I think it's a week away.
5 days. That's
going to focus on Rebirth. I think you're seeing them kind of look at State of Play in a different way, and I think this might have been their big thing. But that does, looking more at what you're thinking, I think it'd be really bold, and I would love to see it. But I think it'd be very bold for Sony to say, we're putting all of our cards on the table, to go back to your, thinning out the deck. I think putting the rest of their actual first-party cards on the table at one event is a crazy pipe dream that I would love to be true, but I don't think it really makes sense with Sony's idea of finding ways to keep you engaged, keep you interested, but still always have something in the pocket, which I think we're learning more and more. Developers, or rather publishers, always like to have something in the pocket, definitely when it's someone who's a manufacturer for a console, because they need that something that they can kind of throw out whenever they feel like, I need it. And I tend to think that they don't get too comfortable throwing that out until they get something else in their pocket, and they go, okay, if I shoot this bullet, I've still got this one in my pocket that I can still save. So I would think that, you might get lucky and see 2 out of those 7 in a single showcase, maybe even 3. But man, it would be a crazy day if there really was a State of Play or their E3 equivalent, and you did get to see a Naughty Dog, a Sucker Punch, what London Studio's up to. So it would be cool. What Ben's doing, there's a lot.
Yeah. Here's why I would kind of push back against you, because I don't think you're wrong. But Sony also announced a PlayStation 6 game today. So I don't know.
Whether they said that or not, it's clearly the case. Yeah.
He did say it. A next generation title.
True. Is it just me, though? Let me take a second right there. Is it just me, or has the wording next gen just kind of lost all meaning? Maybe it's because I've gotten older and my time scale feels so different than it used to. Maybe it's because the generations don't see jumps in the same way, so the lines start to blur. Maybe it's because there was so much cross gen that you started kind of getting jaded on the idea of next gen. But when I hear that word, it used to mean something to me. And here lately, for about the last 2 years, I've noticed that if someone says next gen, it's almost like it goes in my ear and out, and I forget that was even the wording they used. I just heard game.
Well, I think you
were correct. He did say next gen.
He did. I think it depends, right? Because you could also look at this as, he never said it, but you could look at this as the next gen. I guess we're talking about Hideo Kojima came on stage. He showed, I guess there was no stages. Well, actually, that was very much a sound stage. But
yes, it was.
He came on and they showed a trailer for Death Stranding 2, which looked awesome. We will discuss it more later. But he also came up with Herman Hulst and announced another PlayStation exclusive, which is so obviously a PlayStation 6 game. I'm shocked they announced it.
Yeah.
We'll talk. I'll give you my theory later, but I even lost my train of thought. But the point I'm making is, I think the way people talk, you could look at that as, I'm making the next generation of Metal Gear with Fizzant or whatever the hell it is, or either way. But I think the problem this generation specifically I've noticed is people for some reason seemed very hesitant to call the PlayStation 5 current gen. And I don't know, I don't even think we got to that point until 3 years later when it was more readily available. And I don't know if that was because people were like, well, you can't get it, so it's still next gen for 90% of the people. But like,
I think that's what it is, right? I think it became a need for, what we talked about with cross-gen, availability issues. And I also just think we're kind of at that point where this gets into a weird thing, and I don't want to sound pedantic, but I do want to be just factual for a second.
okay.
There is like, I did this the other day because I was like, I wonder if there's an easy way to determine what PS5 exclusives are out there. And I mean genuine PS5 exclusives. You can only play them here. And so I went to Wikipedia, and there is indeed a page for PS5 exclusives. Do you want to know how many games are on that page?
6.
12. Of those 12, I think 7 of them have not even released yet. Rise of the Ronin is one of them. But my point being, I partially think that's happening because of the fact that there really hasn't been the ability or the room for there to be allowed to be really exclusives. And now I want to take a second, go back to that number in case anyone's like, what, how? Returnal and Ratchet and Clank both got PC ports. They are not actually exclusives. I do think for the spirit of what we're talking about, they were built with next gen in mind. And I think they were definitely trying to represent the idea of a next generation game. So I want to give them their room and say, yeah, that's what they are. But then you have titles like Horizon and God of War that were really not. They were really more of the same, but just better on PS5. And not that that was a terrible thing. It's just that was what the games were aiming for because they kind of knew when the PlayStation 5 was coming and these games are still in production, like, we don't know how well we're going to be able to actually get these consoles out and about. It's going to be smarter for us if we put this game on more things from a business perspective. It's going to look better from a PR perspective that we're supporting gamers who can't reach the new consoles. And so I think the idea of them being next gen has kind of just moved along. And I think it's only just now starting to happen. Even if that's not the truth, it's the sentiment that a lot of people accidentally carry just by the way that things unfolded. So I think you're right to a degree.
Yeah,
I'd be curious.
I just wonder if we have to just start. I mean, I guess I don't wonder. It's very clearly true that we have to just start accepting that exclusive means console exclusive means not on Xbox.
We're definitely moving much closer to that now.
Everything is on PC. And I wonder if it's because of the power of the quote unquote power of these consoles, where it's like, we might as well just throw it up there. It can run at, it'll take the highest settings and it'll look the best on PC, but that's fine.
Yeah.
It's just clear
I think,
right now.
I think we're clearly moving more and more toward the idea. And I think even some of these exclusives will not stay exclusive for long. Even ones like Rise of the Ronin that currently is a PS5 exclusive. I would not be surprised to see within a year's time that we see a PC port, if not a full-on potentially Xbox port. A PC port seems most likely, though. We saw that very similar thing with Neo. So,
well, I don't know. I think, doesn't Sony own that IP?
Neo?
No, Rise of the Ronin.
Yeah, I think they own Neo as well, though.
Well, then that shit ain't coming to Xbox. That was the point I was making.
I may be wrong. I think Neo may have come. No, Team
Neo
has no possibility of Neo coming to Xbox.
Yeah.
So who knows? I mean, Sony is pretty well known for the fact that they like to hold on to IP from partners that they do. Like, hey, we'll pay for the game, we'll do all this, all that, but we're going to own the IP.
Yeah.
Rather smartly, if we're being honest. I mean, the IP does carry a lot of inherent value, but
before we break into the games, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Herman Hulst is the next PlayStation CEO, is he not?
Man, I like him in the role. Yeah. This is what gets weird. as Sony continued to kind of consolidate PlayStation into more of a global brand with a singular president rather than having presidents per region like they did for a long time, of course, with that move becomes a much larger company and a much larger corporation that's working here. And so I'm not surprised to see that Jim Ryan, a far more cold and calculated feeling CEO or president or whatever you want to call it, has kind of taken reign there. But I think the weird thing that comes alongside that is, and I don't think they care, but it's just an observation. One of the things people like so much about Phil Spencer is that he still feels like an everyman, even if most of the time he's speaking in ways that are very convenient for him. And that's the reality. That's his job. And I don't even really hate him, or I don't hate him anyway, but I don't begrudge him for doing these things. I understand the position he's in, but he tries to do everything through the flair of, I'm just like all of you guys. And at the end of the day, of course, all of them are. We're all humans. But he does feel more in touch with gaming than someone like Jim Ryan did. Now, whether that's good or bad doesn't really matter. But optically speaking, I think people really miss the days when PlayStation's bosses all kind of felt like they cared a little bit more about gaming. Like even Jack Tretton, who I think was the closest to Jim Ryan in terms of style, was this kind of idea of like, well, yeah, he's always wearing a business suit and everything. But when he talks about gaming, there's a clear excitement about what games are doing. There's a clear knowledge about what games are doing and an investment in the product. And then I think you have like Sean Layden, who had the most, I'm just a gamer who managed to get to the top of a company, is what he felt like. And then even people like Andrew House, I think, very businessman. You know, he was the one that was in the video with Kojima announcing that they were doing Death Stranding or doing a new IP with him. And he has that kind of like, I'm a businessman, but at the same time, I care about what's going on. Jim Ryan has never given me that vibe. He's just given me I know what's going to make us money and I'm going to do what makes us money. So as much as I think I would like to see Herman in that position, I don't know if PlayStation and their board of people that are looking at what makes the most sense to go there are looking at someone like Herman to go into that role. I think they may be worried that he's too everyman and he may be trying to push for decisions that don't quite line up. Well, but I like Herman, and I always have.
First of all, I felt like the way they presented him was very much like grooming him to be the CEO, because he was doing everything Jim Ryan would have done. But here's the thing. We're going to get into JFK, because JFK, isn't dead levels of conspiracy here for a second. But is it possible, right, given what's happened after Jim has announced his retirement, outside of the big deal he just announced in a t-shirt, that he was removed? They canceled live service games, scaled live service back. They're going back to focusing on single player games. He just randomly retires. I feel like it's very possible that they looked at the success of the PS4 and to a degree the PS3 era, when you had guys like Gio Corsi or Shuhei actually existing outside of random tweets. You know what I mean? And now they have Herman Hulst, who's a game guy, but let's not discount his business acumen, because as much as I don't like Horizon, his studio that I don't know if he started it, but he ran it, was responsible for 2 of PlayStation's large IPs, right? Killzone at the time, and now Horizon, which is clearly they're trying to mold Aloy into the next like Nathan Drake level figure of synonymous with PlayStation, right?
Yeah, sure.
So the question there is like, yeah, he might be an everyman, but they were at their best with everyman. That I don't like the way that sentence felt in my mouth, but you know what I mean. He was the guy who he's a gamer's gamer, and I think they might look at Jim Ryan and go, he tried to make us the most money, and now we're saddled with Bungie, and now we're saddled with 25,000 live service games that are of varying quality, and let's just go back to what we were doing before and give a guy who knows games. And if you believe what Herman Hulst said, he's the reason that Sony now has the next Metal Gear. Right?
Yeah.
So I don't know. To me, I think it wouldn't surprise me if Herman got this job and it signaled we're going back to games first.
Yeah, I get your idea, right?
They were at
It's
the
like
best.
Silently correcting themselves to,
Right.
we don't want to look bad. We don't want to take PR. So we're going to silently say, we're going to nudge Jim Ryan towards retirement. And then we're going to bring someone in who can start to regime change without us ever announcing an intent to do so. It's just over time, you'll see the change.
Right.
Again, is that totally possible? Yes. But it's really hard to discount just how much money that Jim Ryan has made for PlayStation and how much larger PlayStation has grown under Jim Ryan's leadership. Now, whether that's a direct result of Jim Ryan is really hard to figure out. It's super complicated.
You got to give Jim Ryan
to some degree.
Yeah,
he was successful, regardless of how we feel.
The way he navigated COVID was masterful, right? Like,
yeah.
But I think like when we look back in 10 years on episode 8006 and we see the direction that they went, it wouldn't surprise me if the Jim Ryan era was the most successful money-wise, but we don't think about a single PlayStation game from this era. Because I'm
gonna be honest. Do they care about that? They care about making money, if we're being honest.
Of course they care about that. Are you serious? Like they
care about long-term legacy, because legacy instills people to want to spend more money with you, and it's brand strength and brand rewards and loyalty and wanting to pay that off. So yes, they care to an extent, but they also know that whatever's going to make them the most money. Now, you're still clearly getting at the fact that, because I think it's worth bringing up that Herman Hulst, as far as I can tell, he was the managing director, co-founder, managing director of Lost Boys or whatever that eventually became Guerrilla. And I think the interesting thing there is I don't think he really played much of a creative role in the studio. I think he just kind of has an eye for what works and has always kind of been behind that. So I think he would be the right kind of person to move in there. And I could see that being... You get your cake and eat it too, sort of. Like we get someone who still has a high business acumen and wants to push for that, and then also still has a little bit more of a cachet with gamers without being as lax as sometimes I think people worried that Sean Layden was. Just Sean Layden had a very like, oh, I'm a gamer. We're doing what's good for the gamers, and it sometimes felt like he would do it even at the detriment of the company. We know that's not true. It's just optics, because I think that he was very clearly uncomfortable with the share. What is it? What do you even call that? Crossplay. He was very uncomfortable with the crossplay situation, but he had to navigate it in the way that a business trying to make money is working toward. And he was faced with having to deal with people getting mad at him because he seems like an everyman and being like, well, if you're such an everyman, why can't I fucking play Fortnite on my Switch without having to rebuy everything and blah, blah, blah. You know what I mean? So to that end, PlayStation's always been a business, but they've definitely moved away from that feeling. So I'd love to see this. And it would be interesting to see if that's the way they go. It's just not at the forefront of how I think Sony's is really worried about PlayStation right now, because it's growing so big. But I don't know that there's an obvious candidate for who's going to take that position. So I really don't know. The reason that I find that weird is because PlayStation's so much less about just games nowadays, with PlayStation Productions and all these other legs of the business that are worried about cross-media. I don't know who they would trust to put in there. I don't know if Herman, who is very specifically geared towards games, is going to be the right. He could be, but he's not obvious.
Yeah, but I don't really think Jim Ryan is the one who greenlit Uncharted, so I don't know that that's...
Well, we kind of know he wasn't, considering the fact that Uncharted just languished in development hell forever, but I guess he was at least part of it finally pushing through to some degree.
Well, I don't think he greenlit Netflix's Horizon, or no, Amazon's Horizon?
Netflix's God of War? Netflix's God of War, and then Peacock.
No, Amazon God of War, Netflix Horizon.
Dude, I don't know.
Who gives a shit? Let's talk about the games.
Let's talk about the games. All right. So I do have a list up just to kind of be able to reference them. Of course, it's not completely in order, but it's not too crazy to kind of come out of the gate. And let's get Foamstars out of the way, because I think that that's the simplest one to kind of come in. Foamstars has continued to surprise me as far as people seem to be actually interested in the game. Positive word of mouth after the beta This is what I'd say. Outside looking in, having not played either of them, the word of mouth around Foamstars seems more positive than the word of mouth around Suicide Squad. And of the two, if you were to ask me 5 years ago that there was going to be a Rocksteady game and this Square Enix game where you shot foam at people, which one would be more hype behind it? I would have thought Rocksteady's game.
Yeah.
And that still may be the case because, we're kind of in the slight bubble of the internet. But I've been surprised at people seeming to be enjoying Foamstars. Foamstars is clearly a much cheaper game to make, and it makes a much more obvious way to continue to make money as a live service. This didn't move me towards playing it. Did it do anything for you?
Not really. It still looks like a game. I'm gonna try it because it's free and it very well could be fun. But yeah, I don't particularly. I'm not particularly excited about Foamstars.
Yeah, I'm with you. Moving to something that I think both of us have slowly but surely moved more towards being excited about. I wouldn't still say that I'm just like over the top hyped about it, but showing what they showed today kind of pushed me in the right direction even more. And that's Dragon's Dogma 2.
Okay.
I thought it was a really strong showing, and it really hit at how much variety the showcase had. And when they knew to dig deep into a title and when they knew to kind of flash it up, let it come through, have its moment, and back away.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm very excited for Dragon's Dogma.
Nice. It's just the problem with this year is it's kind of like last year. It's like every month has a huge game that I am excited for, but I'm like, what if I'm not done with the last one? And so I worry. But Dragon's Dogma is cool. And if it's like the first one where you can play it 2-player, we should aim to do what we can never seem to do and actually try and play something together, Chris. Again. Yes. Hey, are we ever going to play the Survivalist again?
Yeah. Yeah. We'll do that tomorrow night when I get home from work.
Unfortunately, I can't.
Go fuck yourself. No, I'm just kidding.
I've become the dad of the friends group who's teaching everybody to not pay other people to do like basic remodel work. And I'm instead teaching them all how to do it.
Oh,
so my wife told me, she said, you've become the dad of your friends group. And I said, how? She goes, you're teaching them all the things that a dad would normally teach them.
You're like, I'll teach you for free, but you must call me daddy the whole time.
I should tell Casey that. Be like, listen, man, I just want you to know I'm saving you at least $1,000 by showing you how to do some of these things yourself and helping you do some of it. So henceforth, I will be referred to as daddy.
Papa.
Papa. What's the weird one? Zaddy?
Yeah, Zaddy.
Dragon's Dogma 2 looks really cool. And I know a lot of people who are big fans of it, both in my personal life and even people who we've interacted with on the show. Like Ryan is a huge fan of the first Dragon's Dogma. I never got around to even playing Dark Arisen, so I don't really have... I know the game. I know of the game. I watched one of my friends play it when the original came out, but it's looking really good.
Breaking news, Brett. I own Dark Arisen, so...
Oh, breaking news. I could play it if I ever found time to, but that would mean that I have to not play Fast and Furious Spy Racer, The Rise of Shifter.
Blake is just screaming at you.
Who is?
Blake.
Yeah. He's also like, you wouldn't try the fucking crew. Spoiler alert, the game's not as bad as you'd think.
Good Lord. Oh, God. What's next?
But it's also not good. I want to throw that out there.
Thanks for clarifying.
Next up, Hit Vampire RPG V Rising is a game I had never heard of, but it's apparently it's a hit. So that means it's been elsewhere, as we've seen a lot of games kind of moving over, just like that Darklight that you showed. A lot of PC games moving their way over, but V Rising looks pretty damn cool, to be honest. It's got a lot of the stuff I like about kind of almost this idea of like we're going to be Diablo-like with our camera style, but we're also going to have some of these what seems to be survival elements where you're gathering trees and building castles and stuff. It's almost like if you took Conan, made it about vampires, and then just set it inside of like a vampire fantasy world. And I'm down.
Yeah, it looks pretty good.
Yeah, Chris, I've been completely here for your weird adoption into survival games lately. You're pro Pacific Drive, a game that is very clearly a survival game. You're constantly surprising me left and right. I'm proud of you.
I do what I can.
Yeah. You're wrong often, but I'm very proud of how often you also come back around and express that you were wrong, or just shift your opinion so that you're no longer wrong in the future. You're quite the guy there.
I'm willing to eat crow.
Well, Chris, are you ready to eat whatever the opposite of crow is? Because you called something.
I did. I'm going to be eating some fish.
I guess that is the opposite, right? Birds are in the sky, fish are in the sea. So, yeah.
Dave the Diver.
Dave the Diver with some Godzilla DLC.
Yeah. Dude, I saw just the art style and I was like, are you fucking kidding me?
Not a shadow drop, though.
True, but...
Not that far, though, either.
Yeah.
Because it's coming in May. I mean, it's far enough.
April, I think.
Now you've got me questioning myself. Either way, it's coming in the first half of the year.
The Godzilla DLC comes out in May.
Okay, there you go.
Game is April. But yeah, rewind fucking 15 minutes or I guess 42 minutes at least, and you can hear me talk about Dave the Diver. It's a great game. I'm very happy it's coming. Yeah,
that's an interesting one. I'm glad. I will definitely give it a try on PlayStation. I am really at that point with my Switch where I've not played it in over a year at this point.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I own it. And not only that, I own a Switch OLED, an original Switch, or the refresh model with the better battery that my wife plays on, and I own a fucking Switch Lite, and none of them get played. My wife plays the middle one the most, and it's still like 20 hours every 6 months. Yeah. I don't know why we own them. I'm thinking about just selling them all, buying I'd rather have a PS Portal at this point. I'd probably play it more.
Yeah, probably.
That sounds weird. I know a lot of people love the Switch. The Switch has just not vibed with me. It has been a consistent console where I cannot find anything that makes me want to play it for more than a day.
Yeah, I rarely play my Switch, and Dave the Diver
Legends,
was it.
I guess, was like the last time that I actually cared about one.
Hey, that's a game you played. I love it.
It's a great game. It is. But that was quite a long time ago.
It's got you feeling like Charles Darwin out here.
Yes, it does. It needs to evolve. There was one that I thought looked kind of interesting, mainly because Hoyoverse seems to just be expanding ever so crazily. That Zenith Zone 0, which I don't know what to make of. It almost looks like if you took that Bleeding Edge game that Sony, or rather that Microsoft put out from Ninja Theory, and just remade all the characters as anime characters and then put it back together. That's the vibe I got from the trailer.
Very accurate.
Japanese Bleeding Edge.
Yeah, it looks really cool. I'm going to play it probably. I'm assuming it's going to be free, so...
I would imagine, but considering I've not played Genshin or Honkai Star Rail, that I don't really...
Dude, Honkai's sick. Go play Honkai.
Never say never. I'm just not sure. I'm trying to figure out if there's a real way for me to slot in Persona 5 somewhere this year, Chris. So
don't fucking say that. You're not going to do
it. Listen to me. I'm not trying to toy with your emotions. I'm trying to tell you it's difficult because it's a very long game in a year where I'm already behind from last year. Do you know how many games I didn't play last year?
I want to be just abundantly clear about Persona. The game tells you to take your time. So you don't have to play it all at once, man.
Chris, let me tell you something. You are correct. And I'm not even blaming the game insofar as I'm observing that the game is that long. My own tendencies tell me that I will hyperfixate and play this game until I don't want to play it anymore, because that will happen before I beat it. I already know this.
No, it won't.
You know what? I would love to be proven wrong, but in case that is the flip side, I need to know that I can spend 90 to 120 hours on this game without wanting to play anything else. Otherwise, I run the risk of putting it down and never picking it back up, even if I don't hate it. So I'm in this weird zone where I'm trying to figure out where to go, but I don't know where to play that. Like it's more likely that I would play P4 Golden because I could just play it at any time I'm not in front of the TV. because of the fact that it's on a handheld system and I can just play it on the go. But if I was trying to play the exact same game on PlayStation 4, it probably wouldn't happen. I don't know how to describe that. Even then, I can guarantee you I would probably be playing my Vita only, just like I did last year, for those however many hours of P4 Golden. That's just how it works. I don't make the rules, Chris.
Hey,
my body is just stupid.
You are missing out on the greatest video game of all time.
I very well could be. But you know what might also be an interesting time? I would go as far as to say that it's not going to be the greatest video game of all time. But what my prediction was is that we'd see a little bit of PSVR 2 action. And two things are to be said here. Metro Awakening VR is indeed correct. That leak was pretty much spot on. Everything that they mentioned was shown here.
Except Concord.
You are correct. And I wonder if that was a last-minute pull.
Maybe. Or they're clearing the deck for a PlayStation first-party showcase.
Maybe, just maybe. I want to say, though, everything we saw about Metro Awakening does exactly what I said. Even if it's not exclusive to PSVR 2, it is a VR game that is trying to pull itself up to have so much detail and such dense, detail environments, gameplay, to where it's trying to kind of give you that feeling of like, you know how Half-Life Alyx was just so detailed and so oriented. That's what they're going for here. They're going for very grounded, very realistic. And to contrast that, you have the exact opposite with this Legendary Tales that looks like a crazy RPG set between multiple different fairy tale environments that, I'm not going to lie, looked pretty sick.
Yeah. It was funny because I texted my buddy Sean and I was like, I did not have Sony I did not have the two games I'm most excited about at that showcase being PSVR 2 titles on my bingo card. And for the record, I sent that message like after the medieval game was shown, so a little premature considering what was shown later, but those games looked really good.
They look really good.
Yeah.
And I think that they handle opposite ends of what people want out of VR. One is more overtly not worried about being realistic, but just being fun and kind of crazy. And one's like, no, we're going to double down on being realistic.
Yeah.
And so I like that. You can even see that in their presentation. One looks a lot more cartoony and doesn't worry. It's just physics based. And one's like, nah, we're going to be very grounded, very realistic, and do what Metro's always done well, which is atmosphere mixed with solid gameplay.
Yeah, it looks like it'll be scary too. I will say for some
Metro games tend to have moments where you're like,
they do. For some reason, the thing that turned me on the most about the medieval game was actually forging your own sword. When he was at the blacksmith, like hitting, I was like, that's fucking sick. I don't know.
Dude, when he flipped the sword over, grabbed it by the blade, and then shoved, I was like, this is sick. What the fuck?
Like, I'm in for
And he was
this.
like holding the bow and flipping the sword and like swapping hands.
Yeah.
I'm like, this level of interactability is really cool. So if it actually plays out anywhere half as smooth as that showcase looked, that seems like a hell of a fun time.
It reminded me of, I don't know if you've seen the clips, I'm sure you have, of like, I think it's an Oculus game where it's like Spider-Man cuts the head off a guy and then he'll do the thing where he'll throw the head up and like catch it and then throw it between his legs and then like throw it across into like a basket. I was like, that's what this reminds me of on PSVR, and I'm super in for it.
Yeah, I don't know what game it's called either, but I've seen one where it's like Spider-Man jumping up, cutting the guy's head off, like swinging around the entire bridge and coming back and catching the head.
I've seen that exact video.
And I think he like cuts the ass off or something weird. I mean, it's a wild
he spanks
game.
the headless
Yeah,
body.
that's what he spanks the ass. Yeah, so that's wild. Look, I don't know what this means for PSVR 2. It's good to see this, and I think both of these games will be really good additions to it. But I think this was needed off the back of stuff like the Rec Room VR developers said that it did not make financial sense for them to port to PSVR 2, which does not bode well. And that may be because maybe Rec Room VR is not that fun. Maybe there's not a big market for it, and the market they have for it is on a different platform. I don't know. But it's bad optics to see a company who's specifically focused around VR, who hasn't folded yet, say that going to PSVR 2 doesn't make economic sense.
Yeah, it's hard because it's clear to me that PSVR 2 is not doing well. And I think
it seems the case, yeah.
The most telltale sign was when we tried to play Rocket Fury. I said it to you, but I was like, I've never played this game before, and I'm rank 181 in ranked online modes. Like, that's not good.
Yeah, I mean, and you can try and go through and say, well, maybe it's a niche game, or maybe this, and how new is it, or how old is it? But at the end of the day, it's at least somewhat indicative of the user base. And at the very least, even if the user base is significantly larger than that, if they're not buying titles like that Rocket Fury, they're probably not buying the majority of titles that the system has.
Right.
Because maybe they only jumped in for games that are like Call of the Mountain, which is an excellent game, but you're only getting those types of games twice a year on PSVR 2 if you're lucky. Like Metro will be that game for this year, and you had Synapse and Call of the Mountain last year. Those are probably the only two games of that kind of scale, and we're trying to get as close to a AAA game with detail as we can. Yeah, that's actually a good example. But my general point is they're few and far between, and so if you're only getting people buying, if you're getting attachment rate of three games per system, that's not ideal. So I think going from there is something's going on. I don't know what's happening. I don't know what the expectations were and if they were reasonable in line. And if it is in line and still just not doing well because there's context around how that market compares to any general market. But this was at least encouraging to see as someone who owns one, even if it's fucked up and I still haven't had time to fix it. But I'm going to tell you right now, my drive to want to fix the problem skyrocketed today while watching these two games. I was like, fuck yeah, I want to play these, both of them.
Yeah, I was very much like okay, I'm glad I bought this.
So hopefully that energy carries through.
Hopefully. We'll see.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. Metro Awakening is coming to other platforms. But even if Sony can just manage to kind of eke out marketing deals for PSVR 2 games, I think it'd be smart because clearly the Quest 3 is doing well for a VR market. What did I say?
Exodus.
Oh, yeah, Awakening. Sorry. Exodus is also a great game. Play that. I honestly wouldn't have cared if they just said we're making Metro Exodus playable in VR. I'd be like, fuck yeah cool. You've already but regardless, I think PSVR 2 needs some pushes, and I'm not sure what is a reasonable way to do it. But at the very least, seeing a section carved out in these state of plays to me is the right move, and doing it dead in the middle and letting them be rather quick but flashy enough is probably the way to go. Because I remember a while back when they were doing state of plays that had VR, they like backloaded it and put it all at the end. People were like, why did I just waste all my time at the very end watching 15 minutes of VR content? It's like, well, they need to show VR content because it's their product, but I can understand how if you're not interested, it never swung back into anything you did care about and you did feel like you wasted time. But by putting them in the middle here, or even if there would have been more kind of peppering them in, is a good way to kind of let people go, I'm not interested in this, but I'm not going to turn it off just yet.
Yeah, exactly.
This showcase had a really good flow.
It was definitely the best paced.
I think so as well. And speaking of pacing, as well as just understanding variety and what different legs of the market and the fan base you want to reach out to, I thought one of the really interesting things, and kind of getting a little more, getting the payoff for what they meant by shadows. Sonic will be in the shadow or generation of shadow or whatever. So the Sonic X Shadow Generations I thought was really cool. I'm still not entirely sure what it is because it looks eerily close to the Xbox 360 PS3 Sonic Generations, just remastered with Shadow episodes added. But I didn't get to. I kind of wonder. Oh no, it's an enhanced remaster. See, I saw the trailer, but I didn't get to click into anything more. And I thought whenever I saw all the stuff with the little old school Sonic and new school Sonic, I'm like, these are levels directly out of the original generations. So yes, this is. You know what this is? There was that Mario remaster game that came out, and at the same time, it had the Bowser's Fury edition that they put out to it. That was new content. Yeah, and I maybe it was new Super Mario 3D or something like that. I think so.
The new Super Mario Brothers Wii or whatever that they remastered.
Yeah, dude, that's actually sick though, because Generations is a fantastic game. And just doing that with new cool shit. And this clearly seems inspired by the fact that Sonic 3 is coming this year.
Yeah. Sonic Adventure
and
3?
Shadow's going to be such a, well, just the Sonic movie 3, but Sonic Adventure 3 too. Don't get me too excited.
Did you? Okay, a little quick tangent. Did you hear who's apparently in the running to play Shadow or voice Shadow?
No.
Fucking Hayden Christensen.
Dude, I am down.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah, that was the rumor I saw recently.
That's solid. And he has been coming back. I could see that being a cool PR win for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And I know he's a little like in comparison to like Idris Elba, who is like a really big get. I think Hayden Christensen is kind of in the same level as Ben Schwartz right now, but there's like an obvious win and a lot of people are going to be happy regardless. So that is cool. Glad to see this coming around. Was curious to see if it was going to be a sequel or a remaster, but enhanced remaster is all up. Chris, I want to save one for the end. We've already talked about how there's going to be another state of play for Final Fantasy VII, but there's a few games that are a little more specific to this partnership we've been talking about with Second Party. So I want to kind of run through the Rise of the Ronin, Stellar Blade, Silent Hill, all that stuff. And I want to start with Rise of the Ronin. I am curious if this is going to be a performative sequel for PlayStation insofar as it will actually sell and hit a segment of the market they want. I think there's a lot of cool ideas in it. And every time that it started to maybe look like it was just going to be Japanese Assassin's Creed, they pull away and show something that broke that. And I think that was the right call. Mm-hmm. But I don't still have a great grasp on what exactly the game is. It looks like it's kind of Souls-like in moments and kind of shares some of that Neo DLC, or not DLC, I read that on the screen, but some of that Neo DNA, while also being a little more driven towards something that's kind of pushing against that Assassin's Creed Ghost of Tsushima style open world and blurring the line between those two. I mean, are you interested in this title at all?
Every time they show this title, there's something off. Yeah. And I don't know what it is, but every time I've seen it, there's been this part in my brain that can't identify why, but it's just like, this doesn't look very good.
I think production value wise, it's clearly like a upper end AA game. I don't think that's really, I mean, that is the type of games that Team Ninja usually make. I don't feel like that's out of the wheelhouse for them. So I don't think anyone who likes Team Ninja games should be surprised to see this. I think it looks exactly like the games they make. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Undoubtedly someone does. It's a PS5 exclusive that looks like a late PS3, early PS4 game, arguably. I would say it looks a lot like Assassin's Creed Syndicate, maybe.
Yeah. It's a little janky,
which is a pretty old game, but I mean, this isn't cutting edge AAA. This is a niche AA Japanese exclusive. So I think Neo's performance clearly led to this, and Neo must have done pretty well for them to even want to pursue this. So if you can get enough of that crowd, I could see this being a success. But I think it looks good, and I can see enough people why they'd be interested in it, but I am undetermined on whether I'm going to play it or not.
Yeah, I'll give it a chance, but...
A game that we have waited forever for that has really changed my opinion with this showcase was Stellar Blade. I think Stellar Blade looks phenomenal, actually. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I want to be as ballsy to say as I think it's going to be some massive success, but as a first game from an early studio that's getting to do this, I think it looks great. It looks like it's really pushing some boundaries, and I think Sony wouldn't have backed it unless they really saw something that they believed in this. Yeah. I could clearly be wrong. It could just be that the game's cheap enough that taking the risk is worth it. But I have a feeling we might have, and this sounds weird because, of course, there's a little bit of this in the story, but I think Sony may have looked at how well Nier Automata did as kind of in a similar range of budget to gameplay to all that, and how that game had just over time continued to sell to where it's like past 8 million units or something now. And that's a lot for a game like Nier Automata because it was dirt cheap to make in comparison to a lot. So if Stellar Blade can hit even half of that and can slowly but steadily reach a 4 million audience, that's a killer performance for a game that I can only imagine they got for pretty cheap.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very hyped for Stellar Blade. Make characters hot again.
So here's the thing, Chris. Here goes Stellar Blade, and we have pickups on our list. But I don't know, and it's coming soon, 26th of April. So the front of this year is getting more loaded with exclusives for PlayStation. Whether or not they're first party doesn't really matter. They really answered the silence of the first part of this year with this state of play. But what was shown? Because I bring this up because last year you had it in your Metacritic draft, so you clearly had something that you thought about what was at one point in time Project Eve. I think it was Stellar Blade by the time you chose it. Do you think that's still there? And are you keen to pick up on this? Or have you, the fact that neither of us have immediately tried jumping in to say we're taking this, I think indicates that as good as we both think it looks, maybe we're hesitant to want to add it to something that has stakes like that.
So it's really interesting you say that because I am dropping Silent Hill 2 and picking up Stellar Blade.
Fair enough, Chris.
Because I think Silent Hill 2 looks bad.
I don't think Silent Hill 2 looks bad. It doesn't look great either, but it also looks like we're seeing alpha footage.
Yeah.
I don't know how to describe it other than that. And no date. Fuck it, let's go ahead and move on to Silent Hill 2.
That's how I feel about Stellar Blade. I think it looks fucking sick, and I want it on my
It looks very good. And I was getting very close, but I didn't know what I would drop for it yet. That's kind of where I was at. And I am like, even if I think the game looks great and I think it'll do really well, this still looks like a game that I could very easily imagine getting a high 7s or a low 8s.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what would I drop in place of that? I don't feel that strongly about it, but I look forward to being proven wrong. That's what I'll say. Right. But Silent Hill 2, no date, while earlier reports of it still aiming to hit this year, seeing it the way I saw it, it doesn't even look like a Bloober game. Bloober games usually look pretty good, and even graphically, something looked off about some of this game. James himself looked very weird to me. He looked considerably worse than he did in the little teaser they put out during the press conference where they announced the title. He almost didn't even look like James in that little snippet of like him turning towards the camera. I was like, is that fucking Leon in Silent Hill 2? He even had like the swoop.
He did.
Which James kind of has in the original. Look, I'm not saying anything, but we've both kind of been arguably kind of on edge as to how we felt about how this game will do, because Bloober are a somewhat competent developer, and I don't hate their games, but they're taking on quite a bit of new things for them here, combat being among them. And I'm not going to say the combat looks awful. It actually looks better than I thought it was going to look, which is sad because I still don't think it looks great. But I didn't feel very informed by what was shown. That's what I would say.
I don't know. It's a question of, I think that I personally don't love Bloober Team's games.
I don't love them, but I would still call them competent.
Yeah, sure.
Competent doesn't mean great. They can make a serviceable game that enough people will play all the way through.
Yeah, there's a lot of competent players on a last place football team. Like
there are. But if people are buying tickets to see the game, it doesn't matter. That's kind of where I'm at with Bloober.
Strong disagree.
Bloober games. What I'm getting at is Bloober's games do well enough financially while also being good enough at a baseline for most people to want to buy, want to play, and want to complete.
Sure.
There's still a very surprising choice for a Silent Hill 2 remake developer, in my opinion. That will continue to be my thought process. But I was really hoping that they would really kind of find some sauce to put into this. to really elevate themselves. And right now, with what was shown, I don't quite feel that way.
No, the way I watched that and I looked at it and went, they put a fine team with no budget on Silent Hill 2 Remake. That's the way this looks.
I really hope not, because I don't even get the purpose of that. Like, you don't even have to have a massive budget, but half of the work is done for you. You know what your scenarios are. You roughly know what your level design is. Are you having to redo some things so that you can modernize it? Of course you are. I know that that's what's going on. But it's just different than having to come up with a game from scratch, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, look, all I know is that when I watched that footage and combined with there being no date, I lost every bit of confidence I had in it.
Can't blame you.
I hope it's good.
Let's scooch over kind of laterally to what I have dubbed PT2. And I mean that because it's Silent Hill: The Short Message, a free downloadable experience that you can play as a shadow drop title that Konami put out, that, of course, that alone makes you think, oh yeah, they did that with PT. But did y'all see this fucking trailer? Look, I'm going to download the title and play it. It looks interesting. I do want to play it.
Mm-hmm.
This literally looks like they put somebody on a team and said, people loved PT. We don't have PT. We can't put PT out because we can't, we just can't suck our lip up and let there be any kind of indication that Kojima made a great product. So what we want you to do is just basically make PT, change a few things, copy the homework. But dude, there were multiple times in there, the little ghost thing floating and twitching towards you, that was fucking Lisa. That was the same. I was like, what the fuck am I looking at? This is the exact same thing. The narrow hallways with crimed up walls and everything. She even walked into a bathroom that looks exactly like the fucking bathroom from PT and looks in the sink where there's blood. I was like, what the fuck am I seeing here? It looks cool, but it also looks like they wish that they could have. And I'm almost curious as to what's going on here. Are they not happy with Silent Hill 2 Remake? And so they're starting to kind of figure out what their next project's going to be, even though they're going to still let that one come out. What is happening? And who is making this? This
was leaked way before Silent Hill 2 was announced, I believe. So
yeah,
I don't know that it has anything to do with that.
It's also in first person. I just want to throw that out there. There was a lot of connections that tie it very closely into PT.
Well, yeah. And look, I think PT is something that we'll tell our kids about, right? And they'll never experience, which is sick. But I don't know. I think that they have to capture that success. And if you believe I don't know if you've seen the theories about what PT was actually about. That's probably why they can't put that thing out, but it's clear to everyone in this
that it was
world
about his relationship
with Konami. Yeah. How they were sucking his joy away and stuff like that. But I don't know. I think it's very clear that to everyone who follows video games that PT, its design and the way it played was a rousing success. So yeah, I'm almost more glad that they're willing to do something and kind of in a cursory way acknowledge, like, yeah, Kojima was right. This is sick.
Yeah. I also want to take a second. You're correct. I want to take a second to be not so serious and say that as I was watching this at my desk at work, it took everything in me to not be like, hold on. I was like, are you telling me that they got Mia Khalifa to be in a Silent Hill game?
Oh no, Mia.
But yes, okay, that's my little dumb joke moment, because I saw that and I was like, this bitch with glasses on looks an awful lot like early days Mia Khalifa. Anyway, let me move everything away from that. That's one of those, what has it become, if you know, you know, moments. But yeah, I hope that that's good. I actually am excited to download it and play it. I always like the idea of PT just as something you could pop on and have like a couple of hours of a scare, because that game was just fraught with tension.
Dude, I
so if this
remember,
even gives you a part of that, I'm happy.
yeah, I still remember downloading PT and being so freaked out that I grabbed my dad so he could watch me play it. And then I played a bunch of PT, and I got to a point where both of us were kind of standing in the corner of the room just playing the game. I'm like, yeah, I missed that. So I hope this captures at least a little bit of it.
Yeah, we're of course in different areas of our lives now. It just goes to show how long has been since PT. But I remember when PT came out, Saul and his brother Seth were living in an apartment, and it came out. We watched E3 together and immediately went back to their apartment and downloaded PT and started working through trying to play it. And there were like 5 of us in his living room in the pitch black, only our faces being lit by the screen. The internet wasn't quite as ubiquitous, but it was of course getting there. And so we're just kind of on there all shouting out ideas of what we think you're supposed to do to move forward, while occasionally seeing Reddit posts that are coming up and giving ideas of what maybe we should do. We're slowly making progress, and after about 6 hours we finally hit the credits and the little post-credit scene, and that was an incredible evening. Like I don't know how to relive that. It was just like everyone having this blissful energy and being excited around this. So that was pretty interesting. I hope this does well. That's I want to download it, and hopefully we can talk about it when we do the next episode and kind of reconvene on there. One thing that I noticed that's not on this list, interestingly enough, but I think is a very interesting conversation point, is Sony continuing to move up at what point they think remaking a game for PS5 is needed. And I don't mean this with any kind of stank or anything. Until Dawn is a great game. I really enjoyed it. I know that they've been talking about an Until Dawn movie. Therefore, it makes sense they'd want cross-promotional reference media where they can be like, buy this new version. I have never seen a game look not that much different.
Yeah.
Like, it's showing through, and I'm like, it's a great game. And Rami Malek and Hayden Panettiere and all these great actresses and actors are in it, and there's cool performances, and I enjoy it. I don't know what possessed anyone to think that a remake of that game was needed, let alone a remaster. That game looks better than plenty of games that have come out like this year.
Yeah.
Still, to this day, it's a good looking game. A remaster would have been fine.
Well, I don't think it's a remake. It says on the PlayStation blog, an enhanced version. So it's more of a remaster.
You are technically correct that it's one of those enhanced remasters, almost like we saw with Metroid, where there's new character models and it's built on the same code base, but in many ways it's new.
They're adding like a third person mode, I guess, which seems neat. In terms of this,
first person mode, you mean?
No, I mean
the game was already third person, was it not?
Well, hold on. Well, let me read what this says.
Now you got me curious.
The way I read it was, yeah, it was incorporating a third person camera, adding contextual. Okay, sorry. Here it is. They added a third-person camera, which means you can now look behind the curtain of the original game, exploring enhanced and new locations and new interactions and collectibles.
Oh, you're right. It was third person, but it was fixed cameras in the original. Yeah, that's true.
I don't think I've ever begged for something to be something else while knowing full well what it was.
Oh, the whole time I was like, this is obviously Until Dawn. But I was kind of interested. Like, would they take the idea of Until Dawn and make a second? Like, would they make it Until Dawn 2 where you're using the setup and everything?
Begging that it was. Because here's why. When I saw Ballistic Moon, I was like, are you fucking joking?
Yeah.
I like Until Dawn a lot. I have the Platinum. It's a great game. But, we've been hearing about Ballistic Moon and their Project Bates game. And if this is that game, what the fuck are we doing here? If this is like a Naughty Dog where they were like, hey, we did The Last of Us remastered the first time because we needed to learn the PS4. Okay, fine. But if this is what they're doing, like, I don't understand.
Well, I want to take a second to clearly say I will probably play this.
I will.
I enjoyed the first one, and there was, instead of me replaying the original one, which I still may do, I've debated going back and getting the platinum. So maybe now I'll just do it here instead. I enjoy the game. This just seems like a really odd use of it, and it seems more like an odd use of. I'm with you. When I saw Ballistic Moon hit the screen, and then it became painfully obvious that it was just a remake, or even an enhanced remaster, whatever you want to call it. I thought, what a weird use of Ballistic Moon, and not to to hit on them for anything. If they wanted to leave Supermassive to essentially do the same thing with their own freedom, they can feel free to do so. But it does feel a little odd to be like, yeah, we left Supermassive to just work on a game we already worked on.
Right.
It's interesting. I'm surprised that a different studio did not spearhead this. I imagine that this was probably people who worked on the original, have love for it, and wanted to kind of be like, this is what we wished we could have done if we would have been given a little more time, money, or whatever it be. So
this just seems like
I'm
what
sure
you bought Nixus for. Like, wasn't this the point?
That's my thought process. This would be something for a Nixus or an Other Ocean, because
Valkyrie.
Other Ocean did a fantastic job with Medieval. Whether or not that game sold well, that's about knowing the market as to whether or not Medieval is a viable product in this day and age as a remake. But Other Ocean did fantastic work on that and could easily do the same thing here. So it feels weird to kind of be building up some of these relationships, which we've seen them do in the past with things like, that's how they got in bed with Sanzaru for that little bit. It's how they got in bed with Blue Point. There's a lot of studios they've worked with in these capacities. And it's just kind of weird to see this be the culmination of a Ballistic. I hope that what this really means is that Ballistic Moon is still working on their other title, and this is just kind of a, hey, we are still a new studio that needs work, so if you'll pay us to do this, we'll do this. This will be our first project, but we still have this other thing in the works.
I hope that they have another project in the works.
I mean, undoubtedly they do. I guess the question is whether or not their other project ever sees the light of day.
I would hope so.
Hopefully it will. But I don't want to be pessimistic toward it.
Exactly like you said. I'm going to play this. I'll at the very least auto pop my platinum if that's a thing. So I'll definitely touch this.
All right. Well, Chris, we're going to move into clearly the biggest and best of the entire state of play. That's clearly super subjective. And I know there's someone that's like, ugh, I hated it. Death Stranding 2 did get its update. It does have the still not great name of On the Beach. But let me tell you, I have never been as glued to my seat during that trailer as I was. Sometimes with awe, sometimes with curiosity, sometimes just with who the fuck would think of that. And I absolutely adore the fact that the way they are bringing back Guillermo del Toro is by creating a puppet who is animated with stop motion.
Sorry.
Hey, Chris, you back to the real world?
Yeah. My headset's dying.
Let me repeat myself for you real quick.
Thank you.
I thought I thought them bringing back Guillermo del Toro by having a stop motion animated puppet was such a clever callback to the fact that he did the stop motion Pinocchio movie. I think it's just, I love the idea that they're ballsy enough to be like, fuck it. In a world where rain can turn people old, where we're going to have gloves that are just wrapped around Fragile's necks that just do shit.
That was so sick.
Super cool.
Those gloves are awesome.
But also, I just love the fact that in this world, a main character is just animated stop motion. Look, every single thing that happened out the trailer had me like, oh shit, how does this tie in with the first game? How the fuck does this have anything to do with the first game? When does what take place? Why is he old here, young here? What am I seeing? The entire time I could not stop looking away. And even the scene where they revealed you know who, what a fucking what?
Dude, when he does the thing where he puts the thing behind him and blocks the attack, I was like, this is insane. So can we talk? I guess
here's the thing.
Spoilers for the Death Stranding trailer.
I'm trying to be moderately reasonable without spoiling too much about the first game for anyone who turned off Death Stranding 2. Because, dude, that trailer gives so much away from the first game, first and foremost, while also barely referencing the first game. Otherwise, it's like there's so much going on. I haven't gotten to do it yet. My wife and I went and had date night tonight. And I told her, I was like, you remember watching me play Death Stranding? She's like, yeah, I remember most of it. And I was kind of explaining to her, I was like, I know that you may not remember all the story in the same way that I do. And I was like, and I know that you don't really have any preference for Metal Gear Solid or anything. But I was telling her about some of the stuff happening. But I said, I want you to watch the Death Stranding 2 trailer, because what's funny about it is that there are definitely interesting things if you played the first game, but also I want to see what does it do to her when she has not nearly as much interest for the first game and not nearly as much information, when she just sees the cacophony of crazy shit that comes on screen. That's where I'm kind of like, I feel like it's a trailer that you don't have to have played the first one at all to still be like, okay, contextually in and of itself, this is wild, this is crazy. I feel like you could probably play this game without playing the first one at all, even though you should play the first one because it's a fucking banger. I don't know what more to say without going too far, but anyone who is like, are we just going to be walking again? You bet your ass we're going to be walking again.
Thank God. First of all, I don't understand
in
the
a
people
new environment
who were like, oh no, another walking simulator? It's got a fucking 2 in the title. What did you expect? A different game? What are we talking about here? Like, if Death Stranding 1 wasn't for you, why were you hoping Death Stranding 2 would be? Because it looks cool?
That's fair.
Hell yeah, it does. Fucking go deliver some packages, bro. Like,
I also, look, I know it's like this weird thing, but I really like how Kojima just decides to be super weirdly meta in his storytelling. So I like how in the first game it's all about how disconnected we've grown because of the internet and all these different things. And so you spend the whole first game connecting everything. And I really love that all the marketing on this one is, should we have connected? Kind of like, well, let's look at the flip side of it. Like, you know, this thing that we thought we wanted and that we pushed for, is the thing that you think you want always the thing that you wanted?
Yeah.
Does it always lead to the result that you wanted?
That's one of those things that I found a little weird with it, is like the marketing is should we have connected, but then the story is connecting more. So I'm curious to see how that plays out.
I don't know though, what they show clearly, he's clearly talking badly about the UCA, which is something he helped push forward.
Right.
If you think about that. So it's like he's dejected. I know that sounds weird and it almost sounds rote in a weird way, but clearly to some degree, they're playing off of this odd thing where it's like his trust for people has gone out and he's become protective over this figure over his time. There almost seems to be a Joel element going on here in terms of how they're choosing to use him within the story.
Oh God, I can't say anything right now because I can't spoil The Last of Us 2 and Death Stranding at the same time. So,
yeah, dude, I have a million questions, but also some of the most visually interesting, enough to pull me in without knowing what the hell I was looking at. The little suction cup marks on the arm, and then pulling them up and them squirting out. And like turning Fragile's hand old, like, so it's essentially the time, the time rain, but like in a pure essence form. And that being even, I am across the board. I don't know what the fuck I was looking at. That shit was cool.
Dude, there was one scene in that trailer that did make me like legitimately laugh, was when they did like the reference to the first trailer and you had BB's face come up, but with the black ooze, and then it opens its mouth and the fucking ship flies out. What the fuck is that?
Same. Yeah. And you know what's worse is as it was going and it was like on the ship, I was like, God damn it, this game is called On the Beach. I see it coming. They're just slowly building there.
I was begging for it to be something else. I was like, okay, maybe they got confused because there's all this on the stuff, and he's like going there. So it was like maybe it was one of those.
Was cooler.
Yeah,
I wish I could remember which one it was, but one of them was like something inherently cooler as a name, and I was like, that would have been cool. Hell, even On the Strand would have been a cooler name.
Mm-hmm. Did you notice the detail? I saw a picture of it posted, but when Fragile's smoking the cigarette and there's BTs in the cigarette
the smoke. Yeah, dude. I'm telling you, I don't know what it's wild.
Yeah.
That's the thing about Kojima as a whole, and I think it's where we're going to go as we kind of talk about this, and we referenced it a little bit earlier. But the last thing that they showed, of course, the kind of, hey, here's the big thing that's way further out. They just kind of pulled in the, hey, we're working on a new project with him, and did a little more tongue in cheek this time around, which I thought was pretty fun.
PS6.
Yeah, like you talked about, we got to see Herman Hulst kind of come in and talk with Kojima quickly about an espionage game, a new IP that they're working on in conjunction with PlayStation. Ficent, I think, is actually how you pronounce so weird name. Not nearly as roll off the tongue as Metal Gear Solid, if I'm being honest. In the competition of names, Metal Gear Solid wins. But
yeah, I was thinking about that in the car driving home from bowling today, where I'm like, half of Metal Gear's popularity is how great that fucking name is.
That's an incredible name. Holy shit.
Metal Gear Solid is a sick fucking name.
Death Stranding is also a sick name. I just want to throw that out there. So the fact that I'm curious on this one. I'm almost hoping that that's like a placeholder name. I really hope that that's a placeholder name.
Well, they keep saying it's the working title, and DS2 was Death Stranding's working title, so clearly they changed
just calling it Death Stranding 2 on the beach. I mean,
yeah, I'm not disagreeing. I really liked the way this was presented personally. I thought so
as well. And the real thing I like about it is it did exactly what the Death Stranding initial one was, where they're not showing anything. They're not over promising anything. They're not even giving a real name or real anything. They're just saying, we are working on a game.
Mm-hmm.
It's a long way out. We're not even starting full production until after Death Stranding 2 is complete. And the reason I like that is because I often talk about how they show things too early. And Chris, you often respond with a very reasonable response of, well, it's nice to know what people are working on. And I agree. But I think that there's a way in which you do that where you set expectations reasonably well. And I think that this is the way to do it. You say, yes, we are working on something, but we're not showing you anything today. We're not trying to make you think that we already have a full vision of what it's going to be. This is super early days. We have signed papers for what it's going to be. You're going to have to wait to see it until we have something that's more concrete that we can show you. And the reason I bring that up is like, we hear about how far out Blade from Arcane is, and it's kind of like, what was the purpose of even showing me that video? Because realistically speaking, you didn't give me anything of value there. How do I even know the game will look like that in the long run? It's so far out that would it have not just been better to have him on stage and be like, we're announcing that Arcane is making a third-person immersive sim of Marvel's Blade? And I know the answer. Marketing standpoint wise, the video is always going to be better. But I really like this, and I think this is going to be equally as effective. This draws a lot of hype. Maybe it's just because it's Kojima and he has that ability to make that kind of pull. But this feels like the right move, and I'm glad to see it.
Yeah. So what I was going to bring up earlier, and maybe not, but do you think this was a kind of Sony being like, yeah, we know he's got an Xbox thing, but we got him to do what he's good at?
I find it really interesting that Kojima left Konami for a multitude of reasons, but expressed how he doesn't really want to be in bed with a single person, but he's really just kind of bouncing back and forth between PlayStation and Xbox. He clearly has a great relationship with Sony, as he brought up, and as he was talking about how Sony kind of helped in pushing the espionage genre forward with Metal Gear Solid for so many years. And I don't want to call it lip service. To a degree, I think that's what he was doing. I think he was trying to express that he felt constrained in a way with Konami, but now he feels like at least the constraints are him giving them to himself when he says, oh, I'm making this game, but it's only going to be on PlayStation and then eventually PC. And we don't know that that's even true of Ficent yet, or Death Stranding 2 yet at this particular point. All we know is that Death Stranding 1 did eventually come to PC. We knew it was going to come to PC before it even came out. So far, nothing has been said about Death Stranding 2 going anywhere else. It's not a far stretch to think it ends up on PC, but we're in the bubble of what we have. So when we're looking at all that, and then we look at the fact that OD is with Xbox, I have to assume that's what he's doing. Like, he's just finding a way to, look, I'm going to get the funding that I need to do the things I want to do. There's going to be constraints, but I will choose my constraints. I will put myself in the boxes that I'm going to be in rather than being told the box that I will be in from someone above me.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that this hints towards anything? I've been curious to see, because this type of question comes up, and I'm not asking it because I think anything of it further, but it's an interesting thing. Do you think this continued and further pushed towards doing things with PlayStation, but also seeing this little bend toward doing something for Xbox? Do you think that Kojima is a studio that will just remain one of the last kind of umbrages of a large scale independent studio? Or do you think we eventually see it gobbled up by someone, be it even if it doesn't end up being PlayStation or Xbox?
I think from everything I've read about Kojima and how much he loves Sony, because that's been something that has predated anything else, is like, I've read stories about how much he just loves Sony. I don't see anyone but Sony being able to buy his studio. But this is going to sound very morbid, but I do think they're at a point where they're like, Kojima's not immortal as far as we know. He's already giving us the milk. Why are we buying the cow that's going to lose its udders by the time we're halfway through this series? You know what I mean? And I'm not trying to be morbid or discount the fact that he's a human being, but when you're making a business decision, what are you buying with Kojima Productions that you're not getting already? You're not. I don't know really. Maybe that the investment comes when he's like, I'm going to retire. I've put people in place who are not me, but know where my head is at and how I do the things I do. And I trust them. And if you trust them, I will sell you my company. That was what I could see happening down the line when he's like, listen, I'm ready to be out, or I'm ready to just be a consultant. But the man's been doing this for 40 years and he's 60 years old. Like, I feel like Kojima Productions is a very specific example of, you're buying Kojima Productions to make sure that you have Kojima. So I don't know that it makes sense to do it when he's basically already a first party, in a lot of ways. And
I can see that, but go ahead.
I just think for me, the thing with OD is, the rumor was that he was working on a cloud game for Stadia, and it could very well be a situation where Phil came knocking and he's like, yeah, I'm committed to like 8 things from Sony, but I've got this. And they're like, sure.
It's possible.
Will you be at a showcase? Yes. Okay, cool. We'll take your movie, because that's what I said it in the Discord. I tried to stay out of it today, but I did say, like, the rumors about OD being a borderline movie with some interaction seems a lot more right, when he wasn't even like, we're doing this after Death Stranding and my other projects. He didn't even reference it. So you almost wonder if it's such a small time project that he's like, yeah, we're not worried about affecting DS2 or Fizzante. We're just we'll put it out on Xbox next year. They'll be happy, and then we're going to continue making Death Stranding and Fizzant.
Maybe. I think where I'm probably going to leave it for me is when I first started kind of going in my head of, if we were going to see him sell, who would he sell to and what would he do? And I thought it was really telling today that whenever he brought up his relationship with Sony, long lasting, and how Sony can help leverage a lot of the things he wants to do. And I thought it was interesting that when he's talking about the game Fizzant, he decided that he was going to say, well, it's not only going to be a game, it's going to be a movie and this and that in terms of how it's made and production and actors. And I thought that was interesting because to me, the way he described that is Death Stranding. Death Stranding is, for all intents and purposes, a game that was made as if it were a movie. Its production was very movie-fied. Its writing and the way that it chooses to do things is very movie-fied. And it's aiming to bridge a gap between movies and games. And maybe that line is going to be a little more blurred with this one. I don't know. Maybe that line will be blurred before that with something like Overdose. But where I was kind of going with that is, Sony has PlayStation Productions, they have Columbia, they have all these connections into doing movies. And I could see Kojima being like, if Sony were like, listen, we love your company, we love what you're doing, we're already working so close together, we'd love to bring you in-house and then give you access to be able to, they're already making a Death Stranding movie from what we can tell. So he doesn't really need Sony for that in the same capacity. But, it's still just kind of having Sony be like, listen, if you want to make something, I don't think it's too far out of the wheelhouse for Sony to be like, hey, we're making a new IP that the first entry of it's going to be a movie. It's PlayStation Productions, but it's a movie. And then there may be a game to come later. And I think that would be a bold move to really say that PlayStation Productions is more than just trying to find a way to sap more money out of our gaming IP. It can also be something that we use to create IP that we can reference in games later. So I don't know.
Me and you privately kind of joked about this not making sense due to a rumor from a fake rumor from the internet. But is it possible that Kojima Productions is bought by PlayStation Productions and not PlayStation?
Look, is it possible? Sure. I don't really know the business structure that changes what PlayStation Productions is in relation to PlayStation. Is it under PlayStation or is it a sister corporation that just shares branding? I don't know enough about the actual corporate structure to be able to say that. What I can say is that PlayStation is inherently different than Sony Music Group and Sony Pictures Group and all those different things. And so you'd imagine that PlayStation Productions probably falls somewhere under its pictures, so Columbia, but with a much closer connection to its PlayStation, branding. But maybe it doesn't. Maybe we're starting to see a more synergistic company where even though there's different names, they're really just going, this company ends up somewhere, but it's working with all arms of our businesses. And that's something that's really hard to understand when you try and just follow a trail on paper that says, well, this is what the business structure says.
Yeah. So I think for me, the takeaway I got from Physant, and I'm being genuine when I say this is not a meme, but I think the biggest thing that we will see is that Tom Holland is the star of this movie, of this game. And again, I'm not joking, but I think what he's getting from PlayStation Productions is we're going to make a Quantum Break style thing where you're going to be the main character of Physant, who is a secret agent or whatever he is. And it's played by Tom Holland. And in live action, Tom Holland plays the main character. And in the game, he plays the main character. Right. And I wouldn't surprise me to see him leverage Sony Pictures and PlayStation Productions and the huge catalog of music that Sony has under their wing to increase the game and do that kind of stuff. Because the way I read this was my cutscenes are going to be movies and you can play some other things. Like you can play the gameplay sections and our cutscenes are actual movies.
Yeah, I was sort of thinking that he may be really pushing what Remedy started with Quantum Break, like you said. Mm-hmm. So, I guess the question becomes, how close can you really get? It always feels like the more you try and deal with the uncanny valley with some of our modern technology, the more you start to show the problems with our technology. But it's hard to say because it's like, we often say that we want our games to look real, but we don't want our games to look real. We want our games to look like
real enough.
We want our games to look like fantasy through the lens of realism. It's very hard to describe it more than that, but it's like I do not think The Last of Us 2 looks better if it looks more photoreal. I think The Last of Us 2 looks as real as it needs to also sell us the fiction of its world while drawing us just close enough that the beauty of where it differs from realism is allowed to stand out. And I think you can extrapolate that through to a bunch of other games, right? Like Ghost of Tsushima doesn't look nearly as photoreal as The Last of Us 2, but what it's trying to sell you with its world somehow looks more realistic in its environment features for what it's trying to do in selling its world while still not actually looking realistic at all. It's a really hard thing to describe, but we want our games to look romanticized, and even when that word seems like the weird word to use, we want a romanticized version of reality. So it's, I would be interested to see if that's really what he does to transcend the genre. Yeah. And if he can pull that off in a way, which, you know, Death Stranding 2 looks incredible. Still looks like a game.
The fucking desert part.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, dude, trust me, there's a lot. The game looks incredible. And so did Horizon. But at the end of the day, they look like very, very high detail, high pushing games.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe the PS6 can get us there, but
I think we've brushed past that a little bit because there's enough real people in games that look like themselves that doesn't throw me off, that I think we'll be fine.
Well, look, Remedy already brought this back around, right? I think one thing we're doing ourselves a disservice of is Alan Wake 2 does this.
Yeah, it does.
In a very different way, but it does it. And it bleeds these two together, and it doesn't. And I even said I think more games should do that. So yeah. I am willing to see him do it, but I'd be curious to see if he can do it at a level where it feels more connected than what we've already seen with Quantum Break, or to a slightly higher degree Alan Wake 2, where I don't feel disconnected from those at all. I think Remedy is really pushed far enough alongside that if that's what Kojima decides to adopt, I'm all for it. But I don't know if that really constitutes revolutionizing and ascending the boundaries in some new way that's not already been done.
Yeah, man. I don't know. It was overall though. What would you give the state of play?
Matt, anything like this is gonna be hard to be perfect because there's games I'm just not inherently as interested in. But I think I'm gonna give this if I had to rate it on a scale of 10, it's like a 9 out of 10, maybe a 9.5 out of 10. I was entertained even when the games didn't interest me the whole way through, and that's the telltale sign of something that works. Absolutely. And when you contrast it, going back to Rude Days 93's question, when you contrast it with like what Xbox did with the developer direct, no matter what, that format just says if you don't like the game, you're about to be bored for 15 minutes. That's just kind of the way that it goes. And that's fine. That was the format they chose. But I think that this was a very tight 40 minutes that achieved a lot. And that was good. Sony needed this right now, in my opinion. And they delivered it. So.
Hell yeah, brother.
And without even leaning on Rebirth. That gets its own state of play. That's the craziest part. I was certain we were going to see Rebirth here. And I was kind of like dreading, like, did that really need to be shown with all these other things? Couldn't it just been, so... I don't need to see more of Rebirth. I know what's going on, but I know that they haven't needed to show it, much like Helldivers.
Yeah, what the hell's going on with that game?
Helldivers is the new death loop when it comes to Sony shows it every time they can. Of course they do. They want this game to be successful, and they are going to show it until you're bleeding from the ears. But that's okay. Chris, what would you rate this thing to?
Solid 9, I think.
Yeah.
I think I would play almost every game that was here. So
I'd be willing to try every game that was here. And that says something inherently.
Exactly.
Even if it's just your ability to, portray it in a way that seems appealing. So with that in mind, we will be back next week to discuss a little bit more. Maybe we'll get a chance to play the short message from Silent Hill and kind of give feedback on that. I'll be excited to see that. We'll kind of pull a community stake. I think I'm likely going to do something simple. So let's just go ahead and call it for now. What do you rate this state of play? And are you interested in seeing how state of play continues to evolve throughout the year? Because it definitely seems like this is they're starting to really play with what you should expect from the name State of Play, and that's interesting in and of itself. So,
absolutely,
Chris, thanks for joining me. This has been a weird split of we basically did 2 episodes, and we're just going to glue them together.
Yeah, pretty much,
and that's okay. So. This one was a beefy one. If you are new to the show and stuck around through this, we're glad that you came. We hope that you stick around. If you want to be part of our community and answer things like the community's take question, then you can head over to the social media platform formerly known as Twitter, X, at Triangle SQRD. Follow us there. You can click a link in the description below to join us in our Discord and join us for our day-to-day, moment-to-moment talks, as well as a lot of our other listeners and patrons. And if you want to be so bold, head over to patreon.com/Nartech and consider giving as little as $1 per month to support the show. It goes a long way in keeping this show going and afloat without us having to dig into our own pockets. And we have you guys to thank for that. So, without further ado, we always shout out all of our patrons, like our newest one, Duh Overlord, at the end of episodes to thank them for their support. So, we want to shout out Spencer, Brandon Edwards, Alex, Barry Rogers, Stingray X, Easton328, Aztec King, Lecheon69, The Lord Corgi, Bailey Robertson, Mark Schutz, Cypher Primus, Kyle Grimm, Rude Days 93, Kevin Bacon Bits, Danny Villalobos, Jehudi MD, No Fate, Josh Ayers, Derek Porter, Donovan Williams, Matthew Green, and Sean Santarud. Thanks to each and every one of you. See you next week.